Lord of the Mysteries, A Time Traveler in the Fourth Age by author Kai Yun-ji. Chapter 286-312. Chapter 286, The Book of Calamities. In a daze, past memories flashed like a revolving lantern, returning to a time when guardians were everywhere, and anyone could ask him questions. At school, teachers could ask questions at any time, and at home, parents could ask questions at any time. These were although mundane, they seemed to demand answers. Calm down, don't forget your identity. You are not even Klein Moretti right now, you are Gehrman Sparrow. This identity is fake, just an empty shell. You have no social connections, you don't have to accept any constraints, and you don't have to care about anyone's opinions. Proficient, Klein said expressionlessly. He swore that if there were any other questions, he might not continue to answer them. He was a mad adventurer, not a good student undergoing a teacher's inspection. I need to consider how to answer your questions based on your knowledge level, so that you can understand them more easily. Edwina's tone was unhurried, as if she was truly considering Klein's needs. You'd better be. Klein looked at Edwina. She showed no signs of guilt, as if she herself was a cold-faced but kind and patiently guiding teacher, as if she truly only wanted to better assess Klein's state. First question, the whereabouts of Beander creatures on the sea. Klein's words were cut short as Sha'ur went offline again, as if he was very discreet about not listening to Klein's private matters. Why are you leaving? If you leave, how can I judge whether this female pirate is lying to me based on your reaction? He had just packaged his questions to deal with Angel and Vice Admiral Iceberg, but before he could even ask, Angel ran off. Klein could only dejectedly inquire about the information he wanted. Edwina, also a little dejected, answered the questions. Real world. After spending a week in Byam, Furs returned to Backland via a teleportation arranged by Sha'ur. She had reported a week's time to Zio. Although she hadn't had enough fun, she had to end the trip to keep Zio from worrying about her. Not long after seeing Furs off, Sha'ur heard a knock at the door. Danitz was the first to knock. It was clear that he really wanted to see what could make Vice Admiral Iceberg lose her composure, but it seemed he had been warned beforehand. Several times he tried to speak, he awkwardly held himself back. Klein, standing nearby, found it annoying. He took a step forward, bypassed Danitz, and closed the door, leaving the pirate outside. I think we need to talk. Klein was there to settle a score. He felt that Angel was truly a bane in his life. He had just caused him trouble in the forsaken land of the gods, and after shifting the blame to the fool, he could leisurely teleport back and continue to wander in front of him. He felt they needed to talk. They were both members of the Tarot Club, so what was with Angel constantly sabotaging him? How did you know I discovered an ancient elven ruin on Zimam Island? Sha'ur looked at Klein in confusion. No, I'm talking about. Klein choked. How did you know I found traces of elven activity? Sha'ur looked at the future soothsayer's next-door neighbor in surprise. Can't you show me some respect? Klein almost had the urge to slam the table in anger at this moment. Did you respect Danitz outside the door? You wouldn't have also investigated and found out that the Church of the Sea God in Byam has some connection with the elves, would you? Sha'ur had a look that said, oh, you know too. Klein was slightly stunned, and the words on the tip of his tongue changed somehow. I also found some problems with the Church of the Sea God. This Sea God, I think he's at least a demigod, possibly cultivated by the elves to contain the Storm Church. As you know, the elves' inheritance is the Storm Pathway. Sha'ur analyzed for Klein, constantly saying, as you know. Klein maintained his calm persona, nodding, or expressing his views reservedly. When Sha'ur took out the Book of Calamities, Klein's gaze towards Sha'ur changed. You cunning angel, I thought you were saying all this because you wanted to invite me to explore the ancient elven ruins together, and then the items inside the ruins would be distributed according to effort and contribution. But you've already explored it all. Are you just setting the stage to show off your spoils now? Klein had originally thought his life experience was rich enough, but it seemed he still underestimated the wickedness of human hearts. How could a person be so bad? The things recorded on it are written in Elvish. It's not difficult to understand, but it consumes a great deal of spirituality. Aside from the text, some of the illustrations are quite exquisite. Sha'ur handed the Book of Calamities to Klein, and skillfully brewed black tea. He then walked to the door, opened it, and let Danitz, who had been standing outside, come in. Klein looked at the book in his hand, its cover adorned with ancient Elvish script. His fingers unconsciously rubbed the surface. He briefly struggled between continuing to reason with Angel and looking at the contents, then his brows relaxed, and he opened the book's cover. With just one glance, his previously relaxed brows furrowed again. It was indeed written in Elvish, and the calligraphy was very elegant, but the strange patterns, symbols, and markings, when combined, made one feel irritable just by looking at them. His fingers unconsciously tightened, but upon realizing that he couldn't even wrinkle the pages, he became even more agitated. Klein suppressed the anxiety and vexation in his heart, wanting to decipher something, and saw some ancient poems. These poems seemed to carry a certain magic. His brows furrowed tighter and tighter, and the air pressure grew lower and lower. This even affected the wriggling hunger, startling Danitz, who had just stepped into the living room. He had no idea what he had done wrong, but after a moment of hesitation, he still bid farewell to Shah-Ur, very consciously closed the door, and left. These are some ancient poems, prophecies, fairy tales, and some hidden mystical knowledge that needs to be deciphered. However, reading them is quite strenuous, so I didn't trouble myself with it. Shah-Ur briefly explained, and while speaking, added a lethal amount of sugar to Klein's teacup. So you're using this thing to bother me. Klein's emotions were affected. Even though he had consciously restrained himself, he couldn't help but say in a low voice, "Have a cup of black tea to relax." Shah-Ur gave Klein a mental pacification. The vexation in Klein's heart eased, and he subconsciously apologized to Shah-Ur, then took a sip of black tea. The immense amount of sugar attacked his brain, and the accumulated irritability from earlier seemed to be drowned by the excessive sweetness. I already said, the words are difficult to decipher. Just look at the illustrations. Shah-Ur didn't look at Klein, whose expression was twitching from the sweetness. He flipped the Book of Calamities to its most valuable part, where the exquisite illustrations were lifelike, as if they could come alive at any moment. Chapter 287 I am already dead. As the Book of Calamities naturally unfolded, its contents quickly came into view. It depicted a battle between two figures as mighty as gods. Overlooking his enemy was a man standing on waves, topped with dark clouds, and cloaked in a storm. His face was extremely handsome, his features close to the traditional sense of an East Asian. Lightning seemed to be his toy, and the background was an ocean that submerged everything. Below, the one who seemed to be the challenger, wore a simple white robe, his skin fair, a silver cross hanging on his chest. His hair was jet black, like solidified shadow, and his eyes were pure gold, as dazzling as the sun. Behind his head, beneath his feet, and behind his back, there were golden halos, a phantom clock divided into 12 segments, and shadows hanging down like a curtain. These symbols were not difficult for Klein, who had a solid foundation in mysticism and extensive knowledge, to discern. The waves, storm, and lightning corresponded to the ancient god, elf king Sanaeth Solium. The other figure, with numerous symbols, was the legendary ancient sun god, revered in the City of Silver as the creator, the omniscient and omnipotent god. Klein's gaze was drawn, and he unconsciously memorized this exquisite painting, including, of course, the two rather handsome faces in the picture. However, as Klein stared at the figures in the painting, the two deities, who were originally confronting each other, both looked out of the book, directly at Klein who was observing everything. A chill rose from the bottom of his heart. Klein staggered, his spirit seemingly transported into the painting, allowing him to directly feel the surging, roaring sea and the scorching sun that seemed to be the only thing in heaven and earth. This feeling only lasted for a brief moment before the Book of Calamities was closed by Shah-Ur's raised hand. But Klein still lay stiffly on the sofa, having lost consciousness. It's good to be young, he just falls asleep. Shah-Ur seemed a little helpless. A picture that was too vivid wasn't necessarily a good thing. Coupled with the spectator's power within the book itself, this gave the characters in the painting a certain, divine charm. For someone else, their spirit might have been dragged into the confrontation of the two gods and easily crushed to death. I've already warned you like this, you wouldn't still want to divine, would you? Shah-Ur threw another mental pacification. Klein's breathing became more stable, and his sleep became exceptionally peaceful. Night. Above the gray mist, Mr. Fool sat silently in the high-backed chair, looking at the elegant elvish runes on the cover, without saying a word. He actually trusted that angel, that devil. A mistake, a big mistake. Ah, I'm truly sorry, I didn't expect such a thing to happen. It seems the danger level of this book is even higher than I anticipated. That bastard. Klein gritted his teeth, thinking of the angel's smug face afterward. Although the angel later compensated him with a box of ancient gold coins as medical expenses, judging by the angel's relaxed demeanor and the degree of decay of the box, his gains were definitely more than just a box of gold coins. Ah, heavens, how many such boxes did he find? Klein was now filled with self-reflection on his naivety and simplicity. He was simply knocked out without any resistance, perhaps even serving as a guinea pig to test the harm of that book for the angel. He couldn't even cause trouble for the angel, because he himself couldn't resist his curiosity and took the bait. The angel paid medical expenses, and he didn't uphold his persona as a crazy adventurer to fight the angel, because after waking up, his head was groggy. He reverted to being Klein, and thanks to the help of the psychiatrist, he was also dazzled by a box of gold coins, failing to cause a scene immediately and losing the best opportunity. Spectator is truly despicable. Having accepted the compensation and agreed to the mediation, it was difficult to bring up old scores afterward. Klein could only look at the Book of Calamities in his hand with vexation. He wondered if his reaction had scared the angel, who had intended to continue his research, making him give up on further studying the book's secrets and instead offer the book to the fool. Like Rosal's diary, hoping I can interpret it. Klein didn't know whether to be happy or sad for a moment. The good news was that he got this item without paying any price, and the bad news was that he was the price. Should I divine it? Klein hesitated. If it were before, he would have directly divined. After all, he had even divined the eternal blazing sun and hadn't actually died. But now, thinking of how he fainted in reality just by glancing at the scene of the ancient god, confronting the creator. Klein, for once, was a bit cowardly. The ancient sun god seemed more than just a little bit more powerful than the eternal blazing sun. This book has problems. The characters in the illustrations seem to have a certain self-awareness. Klein recalled the scene before he fainted. If it weren't for the gray fog space being able to suppress sealed artifacts, he might not have opened this book again. But the ancient god, Elf King Sanaeth Solium, particularly intrigued him. The gentle facial features characteristic of East Asians, the elves' invention of chopsticks, and their preference for blood curd in their diet, all of this seemed to suggest that the Elf King might have some connection to him and Rosal. If I only read the text, there shouldn't be any danger. This is, after all, above the gray mist. The mental irritation and suppression during reading are also caused by the consumption of spirituality, and reading spirit world observations also has this side effect. He convinced himself and opened the Book of Calamities again, attempting to decipher the elvish script on it. This time, the contents of the pages underwent a strange distortion. The deciphering process seemed to be omitted. The dense runes and symbols disappeared, leaving only a line of dark, heavy hieroglyphs that looked like the marks left by lightning splitting dark clouds, forming unexpected characters. I am the Elf King. By the time you read this, I am already dead. Plus, a plant. Klein was startled by this sudden change, jumping onto the chair he was sitting on. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, no abnormality occurred. Klein cautiously sat down, looking at the Book of Calamities, which had not changed except for the line of text that had suddenly appeared, and fell into a brief silence. He tried to turn the page, but the second page had the same content as the first. It was like an unskippable beginner's guide. As Klein touched it, the handwriting on it began to change. This time, the font was surprisingly not Elvish, but traditional Chinese. If fate hasn't gone awry, this book will only fall into the hands of someone who can truly understand it. Traditional characters. Although it slightly increased the difficulty of identification, Klein's cultural literacy still allowed him to read it effectively. Chapter 288, Intelligent Entity. The Elf King also knows traditional Chinese characters. But why doesn't he use simplified Chinese characters? In this old guy's speaking style. Strangely, upon seeing some familiar Chinese characters, Klein's tense heart naturally relaxed a bit. Perhaps this was the sense of ease brought by long-term reading of Rosal's diary, or perhaps the curious kitten in his heart had peeked out again. At this point, no beginner's guide was needed. With his rich experience, Klein extended a bit of spirituality and touched the writing on it. The writing naturally changed. Open black lens bracket. When you write this, I hope readers remember our domain name. Find good Taiwanese books, super complete close black lens bracket. If you can understand this, then you must be someone chosen by fate, because there is no knowledge or information of this script in this world. Even the few times it was used, I erased them from the level of fate and added encryption. Even with profound wisdom, one shouldn't expect to easily see what I've left behind. Klein looked at the text. The repeated mentions of fate seemed to hint that the Elf King possessed authority related to fate, but was that truly the case? Klein didn't know. He only knew that in the City of Silver's mythological records, the Elf King's subordinate deity was the god of luck. This, fellow countryman, seems quite confident, but why didn't he, like Rosal, spread these? Klein pondered. If the Elf King had foreseen his own death, then perhaps he also understood the fate of the elves after his death. If he truly had some information he wanted to convey, perhaps entrusting it to fate made sense. The North and South continent had no way to decipher traditional Chinese characters, and since this script had never been made public, it seemed only fellow transmigrators could barely recognize it. Klein looked at these traditional characters with a headache. As a science student from a computer background, he was truly unaccustomed to them. Some characters also required guessing based on context, especially when large sections of traditional characters appeared. He now even suspected that, liberal arts student, Rosal failed to obtain this book because he might have slacked off a bit in college. Klein continued to inject spirituality, and the writing continued to change. I'm not sure of your personality, so to save time and reduce unnecessary speculation, I'll be direct. If you are not of the storm pathway, don't worry about me resurrecting through you. The content onto the Book of Calamities updated. What's going on with this book? Klein looked at the newly refreshed content, suddenly feeling a chilling sensation that the book was alive. And it directly stated that he had a resurrection plan. Klein's mouth twitched. He felt Rosal's diary was much more approachable. However, the explanation above also made a lot of sense. Even if the Elf King wanted to resurrect, it would certainly be through the storm pathway, or even other adjacent pathways. It's impossible for him to possess a seer, right? These were probably all preset contents. Klein comforted himself and continued to tap the Book of Calamities. If you hold this book, the elves will give you some assistance. This book continued to refresh. I'm very grateful, but the elves are rarely active. Am I supposed to take this book and surrender to the Church of the Sea God? Klein now understood. This book must be quite important to the elves. The angel, sacrificing it to the fool, might also have been out of concern that the elves would trace him. You can think of this book as an intelligent entity that can answer some of your questions. This is a small compensation for you. Somewhere, Shahar held a quill pen and chuckled as he looked at the synchronized content in his notebook. And upon seeing this content, Klein's heart suddenly sank. Compensation. Compensation for what? What did you do to me? Recalling his previous speculation that the Elf King might have authority over fate, he wondered if he had encountered something dirty. What does intelligent entity mean? Klein chewed on this unfamiliar term, suddenly feeling like he was reading classical Chinese. Open black lens bracket, close black lens bracket. It can understand what I'm saying. No, what does it mean by this? Klein now seemed to understand a bit what an intelligent entity was. Is it similar to a Rhodes? He quickly shook his head. Compared to a Rhodes, this book seemed utterly idiotic. What's this compensation you're talking about? Klein asked tentatively. Open black lens bracket, entanglement of fate, close black lens bracket. What exactly does that mean? Klein had some guesses in his heart, but he still asked, unwilling to give up. Open black lens bracket, close black lens bracket. Looking at such a useless intelligent entity, Klein really wanted to curse a few times, but thinking that this thing had existed for thousands of years, being a bit idiotic was normal, so he ultimately held back. Having no brain seemed a bit better. If it really had a brain, he might be more worried. What's the use of this book? Klein asked again. Open black lens bracket to help you establish contact with the great Elf King, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket to answer your questions. Close black lens bracket. Nonsense. Klein understood this time. He directly asked the crucial question, is the Elf King a transmigrator? Open black lens bracket. Yes. Close black lens bracket. Really? Even though he had already confirmed it, seeing this scene truly unfold still left Klein feeling somewhat dazed. Was he the first transmigrator? An ancient god? Klein pressed on with his questions. Open black lens bracket. Yes. Close black lens bracket. The answer remained concise. Then does the Elf King know the secret of transmigration? Klein's breathing quickened. As an ancient god, and one who could foresee future transmigrators, the Elf King must possess a vast amount of information. Open black lens bracket. No. Close black lens bracket. Klein's eyes suddenly darkened, and feelings of loss and bitterness spread through his heart. Even the ancient god doesn't know. He no longer held any hope. Open black lens bracket. Perhaps. Close black lens bracket. Perhaps. Wait. Is there really hope? Do you mean you don't know? Hope rekindled in Klein's heart. Open black lens bracket. No. Close black lens bracket. Then do you know? Open black lens bracket. No. Close black lens bracket. Then, in the gray fog space, after several divinations, Klein, who still found no danger, began to play with the intelligent entity into the Book of Calamities. Although the intelligent entity was somewhat rigid and had poor memory, this also helped alleviate his loneliness. At least in the gray fog space, he could relax a bit. The more frustrating part was that this intelligent entity was rather rigid and lacked the function to translate the content of the Book of Calamities to him without side effects. 16 Incense Tree Avenue. Shah burned the notebook on the table. He didn't like being monitored, so he didn't want to install a monitor for Mr. Fool either. The intelligent entity within the Book of Calamities was merely a means of the spectator, a simulated thought, not true humanity, and it wouldn't give him real-time feedback. He didn't want to do that either. I actually still have humanity, Shah muttered to himself. In his hand, a crimson glow lit up. This was the imprint gifted by the gray fog space to every member of the Tarot Club. Shah was the one who grasped it most deeply. Through the crimson glow, he could see the surging gray-white mist. That book was not really compensation, but rather, sharing. There were also many vivid illustrations and various occult knowledge waiting to be unlocked. And as for fate, he certainly couldn't withhold the miraculous fate beacon. Chapter 289, Miss Messenger. There are no ownerless, ancient elven ruins. All the elven ruins here are private property. Although Shah had already hinted to Klein that he had already plundered all the valuable items inside. However, Mr. Fool, he seemed very confident, especially after unlocking the Book of Calamities. Although he didn't dare to directly divine the origin of this book, he still had the courage to divine the location of the ruins through the Book of Calamities. The firewall attack alert refreshed in front of Shah. You don't think you can find a hidden gem through the Book of Calamities, do you? Shah found it a bit amusing. He didn't bother with Klein's divination. Through dream divination, Klein divined 3 hidden spirit world spaces near the Rorstad archipelago. One was the area where Cavatua was located. Klein felt a shiver in his heart looking at the sea snake's massive body. He definitely couldn't go there. The second place was a gathering spot guarded by elves. Out of rational consideration, Klein still didn't plan to approach it. What was the difference between provoking elves and provoking Cavatua? If he could report them, he could fish in troubled waters while the Storm Church and the elves were fighting. But because of his fellow countrymen, Klein didn't want to scheme against the elves like that. The third place was the secret cave dwelling Shah had opened during his Sequence 4 period. This place had no guards and had been abandoned for a long time. Even Shah himself didn't stay long after advancing to Sequence 3 Sea King, so Klein chose this spot. Such an abandoned, unguarded, and seemingly harmless place was perfect for his exploration. When Shah realized that his old small house had been treated as a dungeon by Klein, his expression was somewhat subtle. He was quite poor at the time, and most of the Beander characteristic he had were consumed, with nothing much kept. At most, there were some collectibles he had fished up in the past. Some spiritual materials dropped by sea monsters, and the mermaids he raised back then would often make their most beautiful scales into ornaments and give them to him, as well as some elven specialties, like the golden spring water from Sonia Island. Do you really have to explore it? Shah quickly made some adjustments to his hidden spirit world cabin. He didn't want Klein to use his spring water as an auxiliary material for the next sequence's potion. As for the various seafood he had caught, he didn't care. Runes appeared and disappeared, slightly lowering the grade of the cave dwelling's arrangements to dispel spirits, to prevent accidentally instantly killing his dear Mr. Fool. He just wanted to show off a bit. The seafood from the fourth epic was truly massive. After dealing with this small trouble, a few days later, Shah saw the void fluctuate in front of him. An ancient bane with 4 severed heads, golden hair, and red eyes appeared before him, biting onto a letter. Rini Tinakel was only delivering a letter. She had originally intended to drop the letter, demand an ancient gold coin as postage, and then leave. In fact, she did just that, but upon seeing Shah, she suddenly felt something was amiss, so she took another look. Then an arm embraced her smoothly cut, headless neck, a white-gloved hand casually resting on her lace-patterned shoulder. A noble, irresistible will pressed down on her, and her entire body seemed to fall into a death-like rigidity. Shah-Ur's left hand rested on Rini Tinakel's shoulder, and his right hand held an open, illusory book with a feathered serpent coiled around its surface. He lowered his head, watching the mysterious symbols on the book constantly refreshing, as if still immersed in his own world and unaware of the changes outside. The letter clenched in one of Rini Tinakel's heads floated to the ground. Her 4 heads looked at the swimming feathered serpent with some fear, panic, disorientation, and astonishment. The spirit body that had been floating in the air slowly descended to the ground. Even the right to twist her body was stripped away, unable to muster any courage to resist. Shah-Ur's eyes were devoid of any color. He flipped through the death uniqueness in his hand page by page. The entire room began to exude a coldness and dead silence, as if it had become part of the underworld. Rini Tinakel was also affected by this power, her initial fear gradually fading, becoming indifferent and dead silent under the pale halo. The envelope on the ground quickly rotted away, and the letter paper probably described the recent exploration's gains and some discoveries, along with an ancient gold coin to pay for the reward. Klein's original intention was actually that he felt uneasy about a spirit world creature with a house in the spirit world being willing to be his messenger. He wanted to use the delivery of the letter to have the knowledgeable Mr. Angel take a look and help confirm the situation, to see if there would be any dangers. He was overthinking it. The temperaments of spirit world creatures are generally very docile. Fourth epic. Deep in the underworld, Calderon. This was once the terrestrial divine kingdom of the Phoenix ancestor, Grijagar, and many terrifying undead creatures existed here. But now, all these undead creatures were fearfully curled up in various remote ruins or twisted shadows, not daring to make any sound. Above the city, 2 rays of light confronted each other, spanning the entire sky of Calderon. Within a pale radiance, the god of the undead, or rather, the underworld emperor Salinger, looked with an extremely gloomy expression at another pure white radiance with a hint of coldness. And within it, a figure with perfect features, slightly pointed ears, holding an illusory book, calmly overlooked the scene. Roar. Salinger's expression was ferocious. He did not hesitate to completely unleash his mythical creature form. The giant feathered serpent vibrated its wings, communicating with the power of the entire underworld, trying to push the enemy out of Calderon. The hermit, facing the enraged underworld emperor, had no expression on his lifeless face. The illusory book in his hand flipped, and the pure white radiance composed of massive information streams combined to form the wings of a phoenix. A phantom phoenix walked out of the radiance, suppressing the roaring, somewhat deranged feathered serpent. The entire underworld seemed to have given birth to 2 consciousnesses. The phoenix and the feathered serpent each controlled a part of the authority, and neither could fully integrate the power of the underworld. Among the blessing of the earth, the most valuable ability was very suitable for the hermit. As an information life, the hermit could even temporarily transform into a complex mythical creature like an ancient god, and what he had to endure was only the temporary washing of the death, door, and dual pathway mystical knowledge and mad intentions. After the state ends, he can naturally sort himself out. After all, the former Grijagar existed in this way for a long time without her body collapsing, let alone the hermit who was imitating it for a short time. Chapter 290 Salinger's Resentment. Hermit. Salinger was furious like never before, his killing intent reaching its peak. The massive scales covering the feathered serpent's body were riddled with cracks, and pale, almost transparent blood flowed out. Yet, the physical pain could not extinguish the hatred in Salinger's heart. The pale flames in his eyes burned even more fiercely. This declaration of death instantly caused many high-ranking undead creatures to be submerged by the river of eternal darkness. The legendary river of eternal darkness truly appeared, but the hermit waved his hand, and the turbulent river was calmed. All conflicts converged beneath the surface of the water, and the silent river bubbled as if boiling, as if two wills were violently colliding. But in the end, the river of eternal darkness was suppressed by the illusory phoenix, gradually sinking, disappearing, and hiding. No matter how furiously the angry feathered serpent roared, he could not break through the phoenix's divine blockade. The god of undead, Salinger, was completely consumed by hatred and madness. The gap between a king of angels and an ancient god was too vast. If it were a god from another pathway, Salinger would still be confident in contending with a true god through the special environment of the underworld to complete his ritual of becoming a god. But the hermit actually transformed into a phoenix. How was he supposed to complete the death's ritual of becoming a god then? He had already collected the 3+1 of death, he only needed to complete the ritual to become a god. This bastard. On the other side, the hermit, whose mind was enveloped by tyranny and silence, completely ignored Salinger's impotent rage. If he hadn't been worried that pushing too hard would make Salinger directly swallow the 3+1 in the underworld, triggering some terrifying anomaly, the hermit would have already killed Salinger. Allowing this feathered serpent to bare his fangs and claws here was already a manifestation of the hermit's benevolence. Sha'ur knew very well that as long as he didn't push too hard, Salinger wouldn't dare to directly merge with the 3+1. At this time, the Phoenix ancestor Griga's resurrection contingency was still in play, and without the aid of a ritual of becoming a god, Salinger was also afraid. He was afraid of becoming a vessel for the former death's resurrection. He didn't care about the mere god of undead, who was not yet death, nor the underworld emperor. In this state of transformation into a phoenix, he could feel a summons from the depths of the underworld, from the depths beneath Calderon. If he were not the hermit, but a true Beander of the death pathway, perhaps he would indeed be the perfect resurrection vessel for the phoenix ancestor. The god of undead, Salinger, felt the hermit using the phoenix ancestor's spiritual imprint in the underworld to merge with the underworld, seizing his authority there. His roar made the entire underworld tremble, and all of Calderon was destroyed by the rampaging feathered serpent. Towering stone pillars collapsed, and tall houses were crushed into powder. Countless innocent creatures of the underworld became sacrifices for the feathered serpent's venting of anger. If the hermit and the Black Emperor's alliance, driving some of the Storm Church, eternal blazing sun, and god of knowledge and wisdom's power to the South Continent, hindering the Balaam Empire's plan to unify the South Continent, was tolerable, then the hermit's act of extending his hand to the underworld, not content with the spirit world, was almost tantamount to an endless feud. The death's promotion ritual is to create or merge a true final resting place for the dead, making it the destination for all deaths in that domain. Salinger had no extra energy or time to recreate a new resting place for the dead. The hermit extending his hand to the underworld prevented him from perfectly merging with the underworld and forced him to contend with the hermit for authority over the underworld. How could he complete the promotion ritual like this? If the control of the underworld were to be shaken during the promotion, he might almost fall directly due to the failure of the promotion. Not only that, the auxiliary material for promoting to Sequence 0 death was an area contaminated and influenced by a tributary of the River of Eternal Darkness. He had many choices, both Calderon and the River of Eternal Darkness could work, each with pros and cons. But now, the hermit's interference made even the stable processing of auxiliary materials difficult. Unable to promote, the hermit not only influenced the underworld through the spirit world but also dared to use the spiritual imprint of the underworld's previous owner. The hermit also had a marauder Sequence 1, simulating the Phoenix ancestor in the underworld, truly able to steal control of the underworld. But Salinger dared not learn from this. An ancient god could not revive within another ancient god. However, if Salinger, this king of angels of the death pathway, dared to use his old superior's spiritual imprint to promote to death, the scene would certainly be very beautiful. The feathered serpent made another fearless charge. This time, the hermit didn't even think about transforming. The illusory data stream directly materialized into a sharp bird's claw that pierced through space, sending Salinger flying. The gap between Sequence 0 and a King of Angels was just that great, even a 2+1 King of Angels was no match. Pale world. The hermit casually waved his sleeve, and the surrounding illusory data streams uniformly turned into flowing zeros. These illusory numbers simulated the authority of death and end, expelling the orthodox King of Angels of the death pathway from the city of the dead. Salinger was covered in wounds, his face extremely grim as he looked at the distant city of the dead, Calderon. When he tried to collect the river of eternal darkness in other parts of the underworld, an illusory bronze door opened, and a phoenix wing covered in pale flames and mystical patterns once again struck Salinger away. This seemed to be a warning. Operating in the underworld was fine. The underworld wasn't opened by the hermit. But attempting to use the underworld to promote to Sequence 0 would result in a direct claw strike from the void. What even the hermit himself hadn't expected was how cooperative the entire underworld, especially Calderon, was. The spiritual imprints of the phoenix ancestor scattered throughout the underworld seemed to have become the hermit's eyes, helping him monitor the movements of the entire underworld. Salinger found another place to rest. Beneath his deep black robe was a middle-aged man who resembled a South Continent native. In his eyes, besides hatred, anger, indifference, and killing intent, there was also a helplessness he was unwilling to admit. The hermit had crossed the line. But he was helpless. Other gods would be pleased to see the hermit suppress his ascension to godhood. The Evernight goddess and the god of combat on the North Continent would be happy to see this. The three gods of wind, wisdom, and white, who were gradually gaining a foothold on the South Continent, would also be pleased to see him temporarily stuck at the King of Angels position. On the North and South Continent, and across the 5 great seas, suppressing a King of Angels like Salinger from becoming a god was almost politically correct. In the hermit, he found, he could attempt to merge with the underworld. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And please support the author by link in description. Chapter 291, Swollen Severed Hand. By fusing with the underworld, the final resting place of the dead, one can become the master of a realm. Hermit and Salinger interfered with each other, so neither could truly fuse with the underworld. However, Hermit did not need to hold the death pathway's ritual of becoming a god. She did not need her name added to the property deed. As long as she could live there and use it, that was enough. Although the name on the property deed was still Garrigary's, she was dead, and the death's death imprint was unique. If her hand was not destroyed after resurrection, then her account had not yet been cancelled. With her account still active, the title of Phoenix Progenitor could be used. By leveraging the Phoenix's name to shape herself and impress her own mark upon the underworld, she could reap immense benefits. Of course, borrowing someone else's power in this way would come with a certain price. But now, half of the death was Salinger. How to prevent the former death from resurrecting was the current death's business. Hermit did not need to pay this price herself. At this moment, Hermit's most significant change was her noble demeanor, lacking the aura of the living, like an ethereal deity perched above countless undead. She could specifically restrain and enslave any creature with a spirit, as if the true death had descended upon the world. Hermit did not possess the authority of death, but she would obtain the death god uniqueness in the future. If she transformed into the Phoenix Progenitor, she would not only gain the power of death but much more. In that instant, she even felt the tremors from the deepest part of the underworld, beyond the spirit world. And now, as she gradually fused with the underworld, the mental remnants of Garrigary that appeared in her mind were nothing. Whether it was the spectator or the sun's authority, there were ways to resolve them, or even restart from a saved file. Hermit merely utilized the power of the death pathway. In the face of the authority of death, those mental remnants became pale. The memories and knowledge within were extracted, ultimately just mental imprints, far less burdensome than bearing fate. These memories and knowledge were like puzzle pieces, filling in some of Hermit's blanks regarding the door pathway. The blanks above Sequence 2 of the door pathway. Door pathway, Sequence 1, the authority of positioning. Hermit absorbed this knowledge. She could feel that beneath the city of the dead at this moment, within the eternally dark tributary, there might be an imprint of the Phoenix progenitor, positioning herself through mystical connections. This application was simple and direct, using the death imprint, the largest mental imprint, to position other mental imprints. A positioning that claimed to never lose its location. Hermit activated this part of the door pathway's knowledge. This knowledge transformed into a fragmented, translucent, strangely patterned key. She gently pushed, and the key traversed space, merging into her crimson star above the gray mist, becoming a symbol on the transfer rune. I am the master of the underworld. This was a declaration that echoed throughout the entire underworld. All the undead who heard this declaration involuntarily bowed and prayed towards the city of the dead. Salinger, who had rebuilt a city of the dead, turned his head in astonishment, looking incredulously in the direction of the city of the dead Calderon. Even though they each controlled a portion of the underworld's authority, Hermit actually completely ignored him and directly proclaimed herself the ruler of the underworld. He quickly tried to stop her, using the authority of death to awaken some of the affected underworld creatures. However, Hermit paid no attention to his small movements. She proclaimed herself the master of the underworld, and the half-death did not put up strong resistance, nor even launch an attack. Even in a world without Beyonders, such a scene would be enough to explain some things. After fusing with a part of the underworld, he indirectly stole a portion of the death's authority. Similarly, Hermit seemed to have understood some new knowledge. The existence of the underworld relies on the spirit world. If the underworld can be fused, then by the same logic, the spirit world can also be fused. The fifth epic. When the past Hermit fused with a part of the underworld, Shah-Ur's control over the death god uniqueness was indirectly enhanced. If his control over the death god uniqueness was a variation of a virtual personality taking over the uniqueness, then what he was doing now was equivalent to a sequence 1 Beyander holding a simplified ritual of becoming a god and accommodating the uniqueness. The current underworld had no master. With past experience, Shah-Ur easily obtained a portion of the underworld's authority through the death god uniqueness, grafting this authority onto his virtual personality to create a new artificial death god, which could reduce the danger of the death god uniqueness. The illusory book closed, and the feathered serpent swimming on it became silent. Shah-Ur's pale eyes regained their color, but Renik Tinakel, whose shoulders he held, became even stiffer. Her long-lost heart seemed to reappear, beating wildly with a thumping sound. Are you a favored one of the bound god? Shah-Ur put away the feathered serpent book, lifted a golden head, and asked, looking at the other party's blood-red eyes. I. This head could barely utter a complete sentence. It was the other three heads that answered Shah-Ur's question. Shah-Ur let out an, "Oh," then raised her hand and beckoned. The ancient gold coin that had fallen to the ground floated up. Pale flames burned on her fingertips, igniting the dust on it, and then she stuffed the ancient gold coin into the head's mouth, paying for its travel expenses for delivering the message. Since we've met, do me a favor. Shah-Ur said calmly. Renik Tinakel's head, biting the gold coin, nodded repeatedly. Help me find a swollen severed hand. If you catch it, you'll be able to. As Shah-Ur spoke, his pupils turned into golden vertical slits. Renik Tinakel's four heads froze, and in all 8 of their blood-red eyes, a grayish-white giant dragon with flapping wings appeared. The suppressed madness and desire, like a volcano, began to surge in the heart of this ancient Bane, the angel of the Temperance faction. The madness was soothed by the spectator's methods, and the desire was also calmed under the spectator's methods. His injuries gradually recovered, and his strength returned to the level of a sequence 2 angel. When Renik Tinakel's 4 heads opened their eyes again, their scarlet blood-red eyes seemed to have become a little moist. Her headless body bowed in a salute. Thank you for your help. The 3 heads not biting anything said in turn. Find it, and then tell me. Shah-Ur conveyed the information about the swollen severed hand to the head he was holding. Renik Tinakel understood. She had good relationships with many spirit world creatures and had seen this spirit world creature several times. The other party was also very strong in the spirit world, basically an existence close to the angel rank. Chapter 292, How to Raise a Child as Learned from Parents. Obsessed Severed Hand. A spirit world creature formed from part of Omi Bella's twin brother's corpse. Shah-Ur remembered that his name should be Jitas, born in the mid-first epic, and currently, he should be an incomplete moon pathway sequence 2 life giver. I'm not in a hurry, or I wouldn't have entrusted it to you. Shah-Ur released his grip on the golden-haired head and calmly watched the beautiful head return to Renik Tinakel's hand. He was not an employer who frantically piled work onto the contractor. I will find it. Renik Tinakel's reply was incredibly firm. The great existence before her had already paid the remuneration, and this was not a task beyond her capabilities. She had better complete it beautifully. Give me a copy of your Rose School of Thought's scriptures, and the knowledge of the chained pathway you possess. Also, give me a copy of the concepts and knowledge of the indulgence faction that you understand. Shah-Ur threw an empty notebook to Renik Tinakel. After merging with the underworld, the dead silence and desolation in his heart were not a pleasant experience. He planned to learn some things related to desire to pass the time. After Renik Tinakel caught the blank notebook, various contents quickly appeared on it, and even the surface of the notebook was stained with some dark red. Although this leader of the Temperance faction disliked the Indulgence faction, she had also watched the Indulgence faction develop, and in fact, she understood their ways very well. Shah-Ur glanced at it briefly and nodded slightly. He took out a piece of letter paper and wrote a letter, which was a reply to Klein's greeting letter. At the end, he added a sentence, "Your messenger is very beautiful," as an answer to Klein's question, telling him that this messenger was very safe and not in much danger. When he wrote the letter, he did not avoid Renik Tinakel, nor did he even use an envelope. He simply folded the letter paper in half, which was a roundabout way of telling Klein that she was not only beautiful but also quite powerful. Ask him for the postage. Renik Tinakel bit the letter paper, etherealized, and disappeared from the room. When she reappeared, she was back in front of Klein. Klein looked at the letter paper, simply folded in half, and inwardly grumbled. He even skipped the anti-counterfeiting measures. This is definitely Angel's style. And as Klein lowered his head to read the letter, four bright heads stared expressionlessly at the back of Klein's head. If it weren't for her emotions having just been soothed, and Klein truly knowing nothing, Renik Tinakel would have buried this troublesome guy in a flowerpot. Lucky, and yet, unlucky, fellow. The broken angel's eyes flickered. He should have realized it long ago. Such a junior, carrying a heavy treasure, wandering outside without incident must have extremely complex connections behind him. Even with prior expectations, he had still underestimated the danger level of this guy. Renik Tinakel was too lazy to talk to Klein. After taking out an ancient gold coin, she returned to the spirit world and began to inquire about the obsessed severed hand. When Klein raised his head, he was a little puzzled, but he didn't care. With Angel's certification, plus his previous judgment, this Miss Messenger really didn't seem to be in much danger. Although Angel was sometimes rather malicious, his insight could still be trusted. On the other side, Shah-Ur noticed that the hermit he was observing, Katlia, couldn't endure the hidden sage's tutoring anymore and was about to pray to Bernadette. He crooked his finger, and Katlia's rebellious spirit amplified slightly. She did not pray to Queen Mystic Bernadette at the first moment of unbearable pain. Instead, a seemingly ordinary astrolabe in her hand established a connection with the gray fog space. That strong will to survive broke through the crimson star's blockade and directly entered Klein's ears. Gray fog space. Klein saw the content displayed by the crimson star. Although the image was still a bit blurry, he could still see some things, such as the muscles of her cheeks splitting open, with condensed flesh and blood inside, as if turning into eyeballs. Above her were a pair of cold, ruthless, nearly transparent eyes without eyelashes. This was a sign of losing control, but the black-haired woman's will was extremely strong. Her body was stubbornly repairing itself, causing the eyeball-like flesh and blood to dissipate and the cracked muscles to close. Her loss of control was caused by external factors, and her own will had not fallen, her spirit unshaken. Those illusory, transparent, eyelash-less eyes made Klein feel a moment of trance. He recalled seeing those eyes behind old Neil when he was in Tingen, and he also thought of some things. Although not entirely similar, that feeling reminded Klein of the brilliant eyes, surrounded by illusory numbers, appearing to be both open and closed, that he had seen in the underground ruins of Backland. Hidden Sage. This feeling. Is that non-existent seventh deity related to the Hidden Sage? Klein leaned back against the chair, gripping the staff of life he had thrown into the clutter pile. As if to verify something, He copied the image from the Crimson Star and threw it into the Book of Calamities, quickly asking, "What do you think? Deities and mortals, do you think the hidden sage is related to that elf god?" Klein had originally wanted to hit that illusory eye, but he quickly realized that it wasn't a physical entity but a manifestation of spiritual pollution. The problem still lay with the black-haired woman herself. Fortunately, the Staff of Life had the effect of suppressing madness for a short time. After helping her, he turned and asked, "Yes." Klein's mouth twitched. With his previous attempts, he didn't expect this broken book to answer in detail what specific relationship the hidden sage had with that elf god. In Klein's opinion, such an inquiry was perhaps a form of alternative divination. Without sufficient mystical clues, this book couldn't answer any of his questions. Perhaps this woman knows something about the hidden sage. Klein thought for a moment and decided to pull Katlia above the gray mist. Crimson light spread, and Katlia's figure instantly appeared beside the long bronze table, sitting in a chair not belonging to the current members of the Tarot Club. Katlia's expression was a little dazed. After all, she had been struggling in pain just moments before, and then her madness was suppressed for some unknown reason, and she appeared in this strange place. How could she not be stunned? Katlia gazed at the towering, majestic palace with its high dome, and the boundless, endless gray mist below. Her heart stirred, realizing that this was the unknown, beneficial opportunity she had prophesied. This mysterious person in a formal tailcoat, with a blurred face, holding a demigod staff. Chapter 293, Knowledge is Eternal, Life and Death Cycle. Katlia, one of the 7 pirate generals, Constellation's master, and the adopted daughter of the pirate king, Queen Mystic, Bernadette Gustave, is a Sequence 5 Constellation's master of the Seer Pathway. She was adopted by Bernadette before she was 3 years old and grew up by her side, developing a deep attachment to Bernadette. After unexpectedly arriving above the gray mist this time, she immediately recalled what had happened on the dawn. At that time, Bernadette calmly told Katlia, "Your destiny is not with me." This was a huge blow to the young girl at the time, feeling as if her mother didn't want her. However, Bernadette's attitude was very firm. Katlia only dared to feel wronged, even thinking about simply dying outside to see if Bernadette would regret it. As for going against her mother, that was absolutely unthinkable and impossible. What if she got angry? Bernadette wore a white shirt with lace, ribbons, and flowers, paired with a simple dark blue jacket. She sat in the captain's cabin, watching Katlia lower her head, clutching the corner of her skirt, and remaining silent. For a moment, she felt a sense of daze, as if a lifetime had passed. Open black lens bracket. As I write this, I hope readers will remember our domain, zuataiwanshaoshuasenchi.com, to read at any time, close black lens bracket. Was I like this back then? Her eyes, as blue as the ocean, flickered, and a gentle smile appeared on her face as she patiently explained. "I foresaw that you might encounter something that would be helpful to both you and me. So you cannot always stay by my side. Only then will you have the opportunity to help me verify this prophecy." After hearing Bernadette's explanation, the disappointment and vexation in Katlia's heart vanished. She looked up at the Queen Mystic, whose expression remained the same, appearing relaxed and languid rather than stern and cold. She let out a small sigh of relief. As long as she wasn't being driven away, it was fine. "I understand." Katlia nodded as if accepting a mission, her heart filled with the joy of being able to help her. Watching Katlia, Bernadette smiled with some relief. After Katlia left, this prominent figure of the mystic world remained seated, her eyes showing a complex emotion. She rubbed her brow helplessly, yet the corners of her mouth curved upwards. "How should I address you?" Katlia's slightly purplish black eyes narrowed slightly as she gazed at the mysterious person sitting at the head. Her peripheral vision caught sight of other empty seats, making her guess that there might be other members here. "You can call me Mr. Fool." Klein's internal radar activated, and he skillfully replied. "This one also seems like a troublemaker. Ah. Where is Angel? Quickly come out and train the newcomer." "Fool." Katlia repeated the word in her mind, feeling a bit strange. She seemed to have heard this name before. After a brief recollection, she remembered that Backland intelligence personnel had reported on this recently emerged evil god cult. The intelligence stated that those cultists who claimed to believe in the Fool propagated that the Fool was an incarnation of the Lord of Storms, but in reality, they were merely an illegal organization that secretly swindled money and women. Not long after, they were led by the Punishers and wiped out. The gentleman in front of her calls himself the Fool. Catlia suppressed the strangeness in her heart and said relatively politely, "I heard your esteemed name from Mr. Z of the Aurora Order. Was it you who just helped me? Isn't that obvious?" Klein chuckled, and the two exchanged brief pleasantries. He asked with some curiosity, "What did you just do to provoke that fellow?" When Catlia heard the Fool refer to the hidden sage so disrespectfully, she raised her estimation of the Fool's sequence level in her mind. But how could the other party not even know such a thing? She thought for a moment and explained. Members of the Moses ascetic order all believe that all things are numbers, pursuing knowledge itself. As long as one's heart is set on truth, truth will respond. Everything is an evolution of numbers. Emperor Rosal also said that it is not us pursuing knowledge, but knowledge pursuing us. The hidden sage is knowledge itself. He is pursuing us, pursuing every member of the Moses ascetic order. When a lot of knowledge is poured in but cannot be quickly digested and mastered, the situation just now occurs. Either open up your mental defenses and accept the hidden sage's transformation, or rely on willpower to endure. If you can't hold on, you will lose control. That doesn't sound like it's specifically targeted. But such a situation sounds quite bad as well. Klein pondered for a moment, so you possess a lot of knowledge. How does the Moses ascetic order view this phenomenon of knowledge-pursuing people? Klein subtly showed a hint of curiosity. The attitude within the Moses ascetic order, most of them accept it. Catlia paused before speaking. Accept mental transformation. Klein was a bit confused. Is the Moses ascetic order that crazy? The core philosophy within the Moses ascetic order is that all things are numbers, and the pursuit of knowledge is eternal. The end of life, the destination of the self, is to bring all the knowledge and experiences of one's life into the embrace of the hidden sage and become an eternal part. And after accepting the hidden sage's transformation, one will awaken more talents and potential, making it easier to explore on the path of knowledge. The order has also developed a relatively safe set of listening methods. As Catlia spoke, she slightly lowered her head. Although joining the Moses ascetic order was merely a temporary measure, she had to admit that the order's rhetoric indeed had a certain brainwashing effect. Especially since some members firmly believe that they are messengers of the divine, a part of knowledge itself. They have countless times embraced the hidden sage and then been reborn, continuing to acquire new knowledge from the world and feed it back to eternal knowledge itself. This view is not only firmly believed by many ordinary members, but also recognized by some of the 10 pillars of the Moses ascetic order. Even those less fanatical scholars are willing to merge into the knowledge they believe in when their lives come to an end. Within the Moses ascetic order, those who completely reject mental transformation are a minority. As long as one accepts a certain degree of mental transformation, they can, in a way, become a favored one of the divine. Those with good luck can receive certain blessings or awaken a certain talent. Those with less luck can also improve their memory and learning ability, making their lives easier. Even Catlia, while believing the hidden sage to be an out-and-out evil god, also recognized that the hidden sage is the embodiment of knowledge. For humans who pursue knowledge or are pursued by knowledge, there is no bias or human-like malice. Instead, it leans more towards a form of divinity. Chapter 294, Queen Mystic. Damn it. Klein listened to Catlia's introduction of the Moses ascetic order, and the more he listened, the more he felt that the Moses ascetic order sounded like an organization of addicts, where the people inside were brainwashed by knowledge. They could even accept letting go of their mental defenses and undergoing transformation by an evil god, coupled with that demonic, self-proclaimed concept of knowledge is eternal, life and death are cycles. This is absolutely a cult. Anyone who joins, after becoming a mystery prior, must observe 5 years of silence to cultivate and improve focus, plus that relatively safe method of listening. Isn't this brainwashing? These deranged people, driven mad by the infusion of knowledge, actually believe they are part of the hidden sage. Yet, those who make such claims are not struck down by divine punishment, and completely letting go of one's mental defenses to accept transformation by an evil god is not necessarily fatal, making this demonic theory even more insane. Klein's scalp tingled. He felt that the Aurora Order and the Moses Ascetic Order seemed like two extremes. The deranged people in both organizations were quite mad. The Admiral of the Stars in front of him seemed a bit more normal. Klein recalled Mr. Hanged Man's introduction. The Admiral of the Stars seemed to have joined the Moses Ascetic Order halfway and hadn't fully received their complete training. If the Admiral of the Stars was also deranged, Klein would really want to kick someone. Such fearless lunatics are quite intimidating. If such a situation arises again, you can intone my name. Mr. Fool felt that this uncorrupted seedling still needed protection. He really wanted information about the hidden sage, but he didn't want to deal with deranged people at all. The deranged people in the Moses Ascetic Order felt even more terrifying than the fanatics of the Aurora Order. Intone your name. Is that what the lady needs? Catlia's heart stirred. She rose and bowed slightly. Thank you for your benevolence. Is there anything I can do for you? In the future, provide some assistance to those who are attached. Klein said casually, as if unconcerned. The two individuals, each with their own agenda, reached an agreement. Catlia naturally joined the Tarot Club and directly chose Hermit as her codename. Without my permission, you are not to reveal anything that happens here. Mr. Fool gave a small warning. He still felt that this female pirate, with her influence and capital, might have ulterior motives and needed to be suppressed. While the existence of Angel was troublesome, he was quite useful when causing trouble for others. Klein apparently thought of his alternate account, World, who, upon joining, was immediately suppressed by Angel, with Hanged Man cooperating tacitly, Injustice watching the show, a dark history. All right, Catlia agreed without hesitation. In her opinion, with her and Queen Mystic's tacit understanding, did she even need to say anything? Simply put, if she returned to the Oravi Island, even if she said nothing, the Queen would understand that the changes she had predicted had occurred. On the other side, Shah could perceive that Catlia's destiny had undergone a slight change. Although communication in the gray fog space is secretive, joining the Tarot Club and its subsequent impact on one's life is bound to disturb the waves of destiny. Audrey is the most obvious example, practically defying fate and completely changing the girl's life trajectory, so destiny would naturally manifest. This kind of change could also be concealed, but the gray fog isn't intelligent enough for that. Bernadette must have noticed too, right? This method of fishing with an adopted daughter. Shah wasn't entirely sure if Klein could hold his own against the current Huang Bebe. He had already been caught once when stealing the Black Emperor card. Even Gehrman Sparrow's identity and Marich's connections were forged through Oravi Island's network. If Klein were caught again, a series of his aliases would likely be dug up. Although he didn't want to interact with old acquaintances he should know but hadn't yet, he was an author after all. Understanding his own style, he probably knew what he would do, so he wouldn't be caught off guard. Bernadette had long since become an angel, a sequence 2 sage. She already possessed the ability to investigate the fool. Using the opportunity of Miss Hermit wouldn't seem too abrupt. Holy Spirit who pursues knowledge, lighthouse of the mystic world, eye that peers into destiny, messenger of Bernadette Gustave. Shah based on his understanding, intoned this honorific name to summon a messenger. Not long after, a messenger appeared, its lower body like a cloud of mist, its body wrapped in canvas. Shah was slightly surprised. If he could summon this messenger so easily, wouldn't he be able to completely plunder this mobile warehouse? The girl he taught isn't that foolish, is she? Bernadette's messenger glanced at Shah took the letter, and dutifully fulfilled its mission. The content of the letter was actually very simple. Shah said he could understand Rosal's diary and wanted to make a deal with Queen Mystic. He walked out of the room and ordered 2 local specialty grilled fish at Old John's restaurant in Byam. The waiter quickly placed the plates of grilled fish on the table. They were adorned with straw-like decorations and sprinkled with some locally produced spices. Sitting opposite him, Queen Mystic, dressed in a girlish yellow cake dress, skillfully picked up 2 branch-like, chopstick-like utensils from the table. Shah glanced at Bernadette. Her chestnut hair fell to her waist, and her figure was perfectly proportioned, neither too thin nor too plump. Her straight brows had a strong personality. Ignoring the fact that her appearance hadn't attracted any attention, there was nothing particularly special about her. She could be described as a deluxe version of Audrey Hall. In that case, let's eat first. Shah asked the waiter to add 2 bowls of rice. He self-hypnotized, lowering his senses, and began to taste the grilled fish in front of him, eating with satisfaction. This style of seasoning was likely heavily influenced by elven culinary habits. Bernadette also dined elegantly. She waved to the waiter to bring 2 lemonades, one with extra sugar and one with less. After the waiter delivered them, he withdrew. Shah chose the less sweet lemonade, finding it an excellent pairing for the grilled fish. Bernadette picked up her lemonade, bit the straw, and watched Shah, who was able to ignore her and enjoy his food. She could vaguely discern some familiar facial features in his blonde-haired, blue-eyed appearance. She raised her hand, and the messenger, whose lower body was like a cloud of mist, reappeared, placed a letter in her palm, and then returned to the spirit world. Bernadette didn't use her sage abilities to extract information from the letter but, like an ordinary person, opened the envelope and read its contents. This letter contained news from the Oravi Island, roughly stating that the annual gift from the Admiral of the Stars had arrived early this year. Chapter 295, Huang Dao, Canned Food. Oh, the time of this letter. Bernadette suddenly understood. It seemed Katlia had encountered something. After realizing this, she was no longer anxious and also relaxed, enjoying the dinner party. Time quietly flowed by. The 2 clinked their glasses with a crisp sound, and most of the customers in the restaurant had already left. You should have read the letter I wrote, Shah said with a light smile, putting down his lemon juice. Bernadette raised an eyebrow slightly, crossing her long, slender legs, curious to see what tricks Shah would play. This is what you need. The method for deciphering Rosal. Shah placed a booklet on the table. He didn't intend to trick old Huang, but something like Chinese might eventually spread, it was only a matter of time. What do you want? Bernadette ran her fingers through her loose hair, crossing her arms in a negotiating stance. Your adopted daughter, I might, at certain times, influence her to do some things. To translate, this meant she would be a tool, because Lady Hermit had an angel adoptive mother, so using someone else's child required payment. Katlia, through her small sacrifice, helped her mother obtain what she wanted, which should also align with her initial psychological expectations. Shah didn't intend to hoard Chinese like a treasure, it wasn't something that was passed down only to sons. Bernadette nodded noncommittally, as if she thought this was acceptable. She then stated her own condition, I need to exercise appropriate supervision over you to ensure Katlia's safety. All right. Then, happy cooperation. Shah pushed the manual across the table and extended his hand to shake Bernadette's hand briefly. What you gave me is very important. Don't you want anything else? Bernadette held Shah's hand, not letting go immediately, giving him another chance to make a request. Let's owe it for now, Shah said, pulling back his hand and tilting his head. He currently lacked nothing, and if more resources couldn't be utilized, it would also be a waste. All right, then let's owe it for now. Bernadette gave Shah a deep look. She picked up the manual from the table, and her figure transformed into a mass of data, disappearing into the spirit world. After she left, the restaurant returned to normal, and new customers gradually started coming in. Thank you for your care. Shah looked at the note tucked under the plate and glanced in a certain direction in Byam, seeing a craftsman drinking and counting money. The Mask of Lies in Miss Justice's hand was commissioned by Alger from this craftsman. I've been quite considerate of the Gustav family. Shah shook his head and chuckled. In a place like Intis, not poaching old Huang's corner might have been out of morality. On the dawn, inside the captain's cabin, Bernadette directly absorbed the knowledge from the manual. She didn't discard the now worthless manual but placed it on a bookshelf, then pulled out a thicker book from beside it. This was the complete set of Rosal's diary, and judging by the worn cover, it might even be the original. She sat at her desk and wrote a letter to Katlia. I have obtained what I desired, which can answer some of my long-held doubts. You are free to face whatever you encounter, as this may be helpful for your growth. At the end of the letter, Bernadette paused, then wrote 3 words in Rosal language, I love you. After the letter was sent by the messenger, she sat in her chair and opened her father's diary. Even though she was already a Sequence 2 sage, capable of directly extracting all the knowledge from it, at this moment, she still wanted to start from the first page, reading her father's past experiences and savoring the emotional journey of this great Emperor Caesar's life. February 23, 1143. It's been over a week since I transmigrated to this world. I need to write something, to vent some things, otherwise, I feel like I'll go crazy. Haha, I'll write in simplified Chinese, no one here will be able to decipher it. This world uses only alphabetic characters. I am now Rosal Gustav, but I will never forget my true name. Huang Dao. Bernadette's blue eyes lost focus as she read this, softly repeating the name. Huang Dao. Old Huang, I really didn't mean it. Sha'er clasped his hands towards the west, towards the mist sea, hoping Rosal's spirit in heaven could understand that this was just a normal educational method, in line with the new era's trends. The old way of parents not telling their children anything was no longer suitable for the times. The post-2000 generation has their own educational philosophy. Communication and listening are bridges to building good relationships. You there, hurry up and come in, the party is about to start. As Sha'er faced the sea, wishing Rosal a warm spring, the two guards behind him called out twice. Okay, I'm coming right away. Sha'er tossed the fresh flowers he had picked into the sea and turned to walk towards the cave-like building, inside which were various male and female figures. Fleet Kent, the leader of the Celestial Church, was passionately lecturing on something. These people collectively chanted the honorific name of the Mother Tree of Desire, desires growing in their hearts, and an ambiguous atmosphere quietly spread. Men and women cast aside the restrictions of identity and intertwined, even the guards at the cave entrance dropped their weapons and joined the feast. Sha'er naturally shifted his mindset and mingled in this chaotic carnival. His Sequence 5 identity and the corresponding physical fitness were enough to keep him somewhat sober while playing with people whose names he didn't even know. He, however, did not chant the honorific name of the Mother Tree of Desire. At this point, he had a relatively clear understanding of his surroundings. The Earth's barrier was still temporarily stable, and the power that outer gods could infiltrate was relatively limited, even more so the power that these ordinary people could summon. These contaminations, due to some additional characteristics, became less fatal. As long as the contamination within the body was regularly spread through parties, and the accumulated contamination did not exceed a certain limit, then one would not directly lose control and become a terrifying monster. Although mental distortion was inevitable, Sha'er pinched the chin of a blonde woman. Even with the spectator's ability, which allowed her to realize she was falling and sinking, her eyes quickly became dominated by desire again, and she let out a soft cry, entangling herself with him. And when Sha'er looked up, all those naked figures were staring at him intently, like a pack of beasts seeing food, showing no signs of humanity. Such a scene was quite unsettling. Chapter 296, Celestial Church. So many cultists. The Mother Tree of Desire wants to corrupt me. Sha'er still held the woman who was squirming and trying to bite him. With a slap from his other hand, thud, the woman fell asleep instantly. He casually tossed her aside. You should become a favored one of the Mother Tree. Fletcher Ken, the leader of the Celestial Church, made a solemn declaration. If one ignored his nakedness and the wooden stick he held, he would truly resemble a cult leader preaching. Why are you talking so much nonsense? Didn't we come here just to play? I'll be gentle. Sha'er assumed a boxing stance, turning and spinning his body. A sweeping kick sent a nearby goblin flying. He glanced at the pale figures on the other side, casually pressed down on one, and the person, still immersed in desire, fell backward, hitting the little monsters behind them. Catch him. Fletcher Ken saw that Sha'er wasn't there to join them. He yelled in annoyance, pouncing towards Sha'er like a lunatic, though he was already a Sequence 8 lunatic of the aberrant pathway. With his roar, the other little monsters also became agitated. Under the influence of the Mother Tree of Desire's power, regardless of gender, they all showed extreme fanaticism and enthusiasm upon seeing Sha'er, screaming and rushing forward. Sha'er was oblivious to the mentally polluting scene before him. He moved his feet with ease, thump, thump, thump sounds rang out, accompanied by cries of pain and gasps. He took off his suit jacket, twisted it into a rope, and lashed it across the back of one of the little monsters. Hiss. As a spectator, Sha'er could hear a sense of secret pleasure in that sound. He raised an eyebrow and exerted force, lashing out with another whip. This time, the opponent shrieked in pain and even tried to jump up, but slipped and tripped to the ground. Crack, crack, crack. The place of past debauchery seemed to have transformed into an even stranger locale. Fletcher, the only Beander present, was casually kicked away, slamming into the wall so hard he couldn't be pulled out. Shah put his jacket back on. In his hand, he seemed to wield a whip of spirit, each lash sending a group of people rolling and groaning on the ground, as if striking directly at their spiritual bodies, bringing absolutely real pain. As the flesh began to fester, the Celestial Church believers, on the verge of mutation, would shiver all over after a few lashes, waking up from their almost collapsed state. Some of the more talented ones even struggled to crawl closer, but the next second, intense pain deterred them. The corruption hidden within these believers emanated as they rolled, transforming into an invisible light full of temptation that merged into Fletcher, who was embedded in the wall. A brownish-red branch grew out of the wall, its tip bearing a flower dripping with viscous fluid, like a legendary man-eating plant. It swallowed Fletcher whole, growing more brown branches. Hey! Shah chuckled. Before Fletcher was digested, his body became illusory, entering the lunatic's dream. In the real world, the wildly growing flowers and branches seemed to be affected, stopping their movements as if frozen. In the dream, a blood-red moon hung high in the sky. Fletcher was being digested little by little, like an insect caught in a pitcher plant. Beyond that pitcher plant, looking along the thick roots, was a colossal humanoid tree with chaotic scales, indistinctly veiled by brilliant starlight and mist. Shah didn't mind taking a look. His sequence wouldn't cause him to explode just by looking. Didn't the Lord of Storms in the original timeline sacrifice himself to collide with the mother goddess of depravity? His ultimate fate was merely death. But unfortunately, perhaps the power of the barrier was still strong enough, even the illusory projection remained unclear. Shah could only rely on his senses to determine that the giant tree bore crystal-clear fruits, a bite of which would grant eternal life. The moist, seductive flowers, their cores swaying with pink halos, also bore symbols of honor and crowns of power. It was as if all symbols of desire could be found on this great tree, truly like a dream. Crystallizations of various desires in the world continuously appeared before him, as if all the beauty and luxury in the world were laid out, allowing Shah to make his choice freely. But he bypassed them one by one. These were things within his reach, not requiring anyone else's giving. What he desired was absolute freedom, absolute security, absolute peace of mind. On this humanoid giant tree, there was none of that. Not even non-absolute freedom, non-absolute security, or non-absolute peace of mind. This great tree still lacked them. The mother tree of desire, on another Beander pathway in the cosmos, the miser pathway, whose sequence 0 is called the patriarch. This seems to be the ruler of all sentient beings, like another father. He is the angry scolding, the painful stammering. His roar forever echoes in desire and emotion. This father allows you to pursue anything, but he just doesn't allow you freedom, doesn't allow you to lie flat, doesn't allow you to see through the dispensable things on him. Those boring emotions, those desires that drift with the current, those roars and wills imposed on life. He shook his head in disappointment. Even with the outer deity symbolizing desire, even in such a false dream, he still couldn't see anything that could truly drive him into madness. Is freedom so expensive? That humanoid giant tree seemed to sense Shah-Ur's change in mood. He seemed to angrily wave the vines on his body, yet separated by Earth's barrier. Even facing the projection of an outer deity, Shah-Ur remained unfazed. This was like a phone call. No matter how angry the old-fashioned father was, he still couldn't do anything to the independently living child on the other end of the line. Such anger did not last long. New changes quietly brewed. Fletcher Ken in the pitcher plant had been completely digested. When the closed pitcher plant opened again, the first thing to appear was a female head. She had bluish-green hair, an extraordinarily beautiful face, and a charm that directly pointed to love. Shah-Ur glanced at her, instinctively averting his gaze, but his peripheral vision still watched the gradually emerging perfect body. It seemed custom-made to his preferences. Even though his resistance to charm was very high, a sincere, pure, and strong love still welled up in his heart. This love was not one-sided. He could also feel the strong love emanating from her. This love spread like the fragrance of a flower, with just the right amount of sweetness and charm, filling one's heart with a sense of accomplishment and satisfaction. Chapter 297, Fallen Dryad. The love conveyed by the outer deity. That rich pheromone, and those eager, expectant, yet somewhat nervous eyes. How intoxicating it all was. Even as a spectator who dominates minds, Sha'ur still hopelessly fell in love with the green-haired woman before him. The only difference from ordinary people was that Sha'ur clearly understood this love was the power of an authority. A sequence 2 of the Miser pathway is called a love god. Love is also a deity's authority, not a special human emotion. Although he couldn't see the full picture clearly, as a transmigrator, Sha'ur naturally knew that at the top of that humanoid giant tree, there were 2 heads, one below, male, with closed eyes full of various strange desires, one above, female, likely resembling the woman before him. She smiled, swaying as she approached, the information she exuded seemingly proving that she was fully prepared. Oh, it's really not a simple male-female distinction. Perhaps the male aspect represents inner desires and impulses, while the female aspect represents outward influence, more inclined towards the impact and control of desire and emotion on others. Sha'ur put his arms around the tree woman's waist. He gained a deeper understanding of an outer deity like the mother tree of desire. He could feel desire and malice growing and flowing within his heart, and desire always drives other things, the most basic being reproduction. You are very talented. I can feel the emptiness in your heart, a desire that can never be filled. Freedom, how sweet this craving is. The tree woman greedily cupped Sha'ur's cheeks, absorbing the malice and desire in his heart. Indeed, outer deities would not display human-like expressions, but the avatars outer deities create based on human templates are different, and such things are easier to understand. Sha'ur bowed his head slightly, saying nothing, but the tree woman, leaning on him, showed an even more intoxicated expression. She clearly felt the desire and malice rising in Sha'ur's heart for the symbol of desire, for the authority of desire, for her destruction and possession, mingled with a hint of disdain and a faint trace of contempt. My dear, you don't understand. The pathway I control is not as useless as you think. However, I will forgive you, for you don't know the authority symbolized by my third pathway. If it weren't for this damned barrier preventing me from loving you properly, I would truly want you to experience this power that can make you fall into it. This unattainable roar. The tree woman lovingly stroked Sha'ur's cheek. Her voice gradually lowered, and as she spoke the last 2 words, Sha'ur's mind buzzed. For a moment, he seemed to truly hear a roar from the cosmos, as if carrying the desires of all beings. Blood flowed from his ears, and his entire virtual personality nearly collapsed from the roar. However, the tree woman in front of him also let out a painful groan. Under the authority of the love god's enforced love binding, she also endured a portion of the pain brought by the roar, and a very large portion at that, preventing Sha'ur's disintegration. She held Sha'ur in her arms, speaking with tender affection. My dear, I can grant you anything you desire. If you don't see what you want in me, it's because I was forced to lose those things. You want freedom, you want peace of mind, you want to enjoy the joy and beauty of this world. These are also the things I pursue. Why don't you try to help me reclaim my lost authority, and then return to my embrace, so we can be together forever, existing forever in the suffering and joy of all beings. You can choose the temperance that symbolizes me, you can choose the malice that represents me, you can become the ruler of sentient beings, eternally united with me, forever with me, and together we become complete. The tree woman's words seemed to come from her soul. How she yearned for Sha'ur to abandon other troublesome pathways, pursue his true heart, choose a path where his heart yearned and his desires led, and together with her, sink into the emotions of all beings, roaring eternally in desire and emotion. Can your love withstand the test? Sha'ur's mind was somewhat dazed. The continuous whispers in his ears had severely affected his thinking, but some things ingrained in his instinct were still at work. My dear, no, you can't. The tree woman originally wanted to continue demonstrating her sincerity, but she quickly sensed something. Her exceptionally beautiful expression became somewhat twisted, and even the alluring scent she emitted seemed to turn somewhat foul and unpleasant. Beneath their feet, a phantom ocean encompassing all colors and possibilities had appeared at some unknown time. And after this phantom ocean appeared, the tree woman's exquisite face gradually decayed, turning into a bumpy tumorous surface, and her soft and beautiful body also began to transform into wood. Cough, cough. Sha'ur coughed weakly twice. His previously somewhat muddled mind, after the appearance of the Chaos Sea's phantom, was somewhat affected but finally became a little clearer. He watched the tree woman begin to sink. Even though she had lost her original beauty, due to the influence of authority, Sha'ur still felt some love for her. He kindly reminded her, the Hanged Man's Sequence 0 apotheosis ritual is to walk upon the Chaos Sea, allowing one's shadow to merge with it, while the body does not sink and the spirit does not fall. This is just a projection of the Chaos Sea. Since a qualified Hanged Man can achieve this, then the Abyss, whose authority is similar to the Hanged Man, should also have its own methods, right? After all, you once dominated the Abyss in temperance. Sha'ur said, his body also slowly sinking. The words, body does not sink, spirit does not fall, seemed like an empty promise. Sha'ur didn't know how Grisha managed this. For him, even a virtual personality challenging the Chaos Sea's projection couldn't stop the sinking trend. If external forces were set aside, not considering the demoness's mismatched chaos authority, nor equivalent things like the gray fog space, Sha'ur would similarly be unable to prevent his own corruption. He was like a magnet thrown into iron filings. Mere contact would attract a large amount of pollution to merge with him. Facing this situation, you must have a solution, my dear. Sha'ur looked at the tree woman, who had transformed back into a humanoid tree, with a gaze that combined expectation and encouragement. After the initial sinking, chaotic colored scales grew specifically on her body surface, stopping her descent. The siblings of God Almighty indeed have their own methods when facing the power of the Chaos Sea. Sha'ur's lips curled into a smile. The advantage of a transmigrator lay here, having a basic understanding of all the outer deities. The mother goddess of depravity, the son of chaos, and the mother tree of desire, these three earlier born outer deities, directly created, were more or less connected to chaos. The true form of the mother tree of desire, the surface of that humanoid giant tree, those chaotic scales, could indeed resist the erosion of the Chaos Sea to a certain extent. Even though what was before them was just an insignificant, crude, and unrepresentative avatar of an outer deity's will, it did not immediately sink when the projection of the Chaos Sea appeared. Sha'ur was greatly inspired. His body was covered with a layer of dragon scales. These dragon scales wriggled like living creatures, adjusting their texture and flexibility. The layers of scales differentiated into countless small pieces, and the gaps between the scales were the best places to hide filth. Sha'ur was still the magnet, and the phantom of the Chaos Sea was still the iron filings, but the appearance of these scales trapped some tiny grains of sand in the overlapping crevices. As the scales opened and closed like breathing, they absorbed a large amount of pollution, their color transforming towards chaotic hues, and their texture becoming harder. If one cannot prevent oneself from being polluted, then one should selectively and actively contact pollution, limiting the vast majority of it to certain parts, rather than letting it spread unrestricted throughout the body. The essence of pollution is actually a type of energy, or rather, power. Sha'ur had an epiphany and tried to intercept this pollution in the horny layer, where the scales were attached to his body, and let his scales actively absorb this pollution. He himself adjusted his state along with the depraved treant, adjusting the density of the scales, wrapping himself into a log that could float on the sea. Although we are still going to die, isn't this romantic? Sha'ur looked at the depraved treant and smiled. The color of the scales on his body was approaching that of the depraved treant. Even though the feeling of suffocation was getting stronger, Sha'ur was still in a good mood. Sacrificing a virtual personality for the opportunity to learn from an outer deity was very cost-effective. He wasn't worried that this would affect his main body. Both the celestial venerables curtain and the death god uniqueness could, to a certain extent, prevent the pollution here from endlessly biting along the network cable. When a person dies, the slate is wiped clean. The only thing he had to do now was to die cleanly. With this thought, he swam towards the depraved treant, struggling in the pollution of the Chaos Sea. Even though both were high-level pollution, the tiny bit of power from the mother goddess of depravity that the depraved treant carried was like water without a source. Separated by the Earth's barrier, the outer deities were indeed somewhat stifled. What could be more romantic than dying together? This time, Sha'ur no longer worried about the pollution from the outer deity. He hugged the rotten log, in front of him, as if it were still that beautiful head, and then pressed this rotten log into the water, with deep love and some indescribable madness. The depraved treant naturally struggled madly. The previous affection between the two was now completely gone, replaced by mutual slaughter. The twisting branches wanted to scratch Shah-Ur's skin, but under the influence of the chaos sea, the darkened scales blocked the treant's strangulation. Even some flowers and vines on the depraved treant were violently torn off by Shah-Ur. When it completely fell into madness, thick branches directly pierced Shah-Ur's chest, and the scales that were supposed to be for defense were removed. Before completely dissipating, Shah-Ur looked at those pollutions that, due to the cancellation of dragonization, lost their carrier the moment the dragon's scales disappeared and had not yet fused, reappearing, and let out a final soft laugh. Carrying capacity, this is indeed a very good research direction. The dream of Fleet, the leader of the Celestial Church, collapsed. In reality, a scroll painting depicting gloomy mountains, stagnant water, and lonely graves of wild ghosts slowly unfurled. Everything in the entire cave was packed up and thrown into the depths of the underworld, dumped into the dark Styx like garbage. Shah-Ur watched everything gradually sink into the Styx, his calm face showing no ripples. As for a lost stronghold of the Celestial Church, who cares? Isn't that quite common in overseas colonies? Specifically choosing an organ to contain pollution. Shah-Ur put away the scroll of the gods again. He thought of the ancient sun god who separated the dark angel, and the dragon of imagination who separated his second personality. These guys basically did the same thing, separating an external, detached, and retrievable organ at critical moments. January 24th, Monday, 3 in the afternoon, Tarot Club. For the weekly Tarot Club, Shah-Ur came relatively early this time. He watched Mr. Fool sit in his seat, preparing. How to put it, Fool's true perspective in the gray fog space has certain limitations. He was above the gray mist, using Saphira Castle for divination, which was the status of a deity. He was above the gray mist, responding to believers' prayers, observing through the crimson star, which was also a true perspective. But within the gray fog space, without even activating spirit vision, what could he see? He couldn't see anything. He didn't even notice the empty seat on the left. Not even a glance of his peripheral vision was given to Shah-Ur. Shah-Ur calculated the time, and like everyone else, allowed himself to be enveloped by crimson radiance, then naturally appeared, slightly tilting his head to nod to Miss Justice beside him, who returned a sweet smile. New member. When Audrey responded to Shah-Ur, she saw an unfamiliar figure appear in the empty seat next to Furs. According to the rule of female on the left, male on the right, and deity in the middle, this should be a lady. Angel, who chose his own seat at the initial establishment of the Tarot Club, was the only one. And Mr. World in the middle. Audrey thought cheerfully, perhaps Mr. World isn't human. Good afternoon, Mr. Fool. Audrey stood up, her voice cheerful as she greeted Fool, who was seated at the head. Facing Miss Justice's pleasant greeting, Klein's lips curved slightly, and he nodded gently in response. Good afternoon, Mr. Hanged Man. Good afternoon, Angel. Audrey didn't rush to sit down. She took a few extra glances at the brown book placed beside Fool. What could this be, placed alongside the blasphemy card, beside Mr. Fool? She suppressed her curiosity and greeted the other members in turn, helping the newly joined hermit quickly learn the code names of all the members. Chapter 299, Mr. Fool, terrifying indeed. The hermit joining the Tarot Club wasn't a major event. The experienced Alger even linked the clothes and hair color, elements vaguely visible through the gray mist, to Admiral of the Stars, Catlia, whom he had seen at the pirate convention, though he couldn't confirm it yet. More than a new member, Alger was more concerned that Mr. Fool's influence on reality had grown significantly. He could now pull beyonders of the pirate general level. How long had it been? Hanged Man Alger thought of this, and even his sitting posture became more upright. Mr. Hanged Man's body language tells me he's a little wary right now. Does he know this new lady? Audrey blinked, guessing that the hermit lady's strength might not be simple. While the other members of the Tarot Club observed the hermit Catlia also cautiously scrutinized the members of the Tarot Club, a mysterious purple slowly flowing imperceptibly in her eyes. Although she couldn't penetrate the gray mist's obstruction, her observational skills were somewhat stronger than the other members. The hanged man is in his 30s and appears to be a sailor of the Storm Church. The son is not old, dressed in ancient attire, but looks suitable for combat. The world, excluding a youth, but also seemingly not an elder. This gloomy demeanor is similar to a wraith or a zombie, not looking like a living person. The moon, no need to look, a vampire. The magician, a young female, wearing a low-in-style long dress, looks very unremarkable, which means she requires extra attention. Angel, there doesn't seem to be this codename in the tarot cards. It couldn't be a real angel, could it? He is dressed very simply, with no obvious characteristics. Justice, that kind of formal long dress, emerald earrings, a necklace studded with many diamonds, which noble family's young lady is she? The hermit Katlia observed the group and acknowledged the value of this Beander gathering. Orthodox Church, Lowen nobles, and members of various other identities were mixed in, making the composition and background very complex. Mr. Fool, thank you for your benevolence. You have rescued the city of Silver. No. You have rescued the entire forsaken land of the gods from darkness, allowing all survivors struggling in darkness to bask in your glory. Derek the son stood up, speaking with an uncontrollable excitement and choked voice. This directly interrupted Justice Audrey, who was about to hand in Rosal's diary. This noble lady looked blankly at the son, who was on the verge of tears, then glanced at Mr. Fool, who sat casually at the head, as if he had done nothing. She cried out in her heart, what had she missed, and what great feat had Mr. Fool accomplished? Not only Audrey, but Alger was also startled by little son's reaction. He chewed on what the son said, still finding it difficult to understand its meaning. Wasn't the forsaken land of the gods shrouded in an all-consuming darkness? What had Mr. Fool done? The reactions of Emlyn the Moon and Furs the Magician were similar. They roughly understood the meaning but completely failed to grasp what it truly implied. The hermit, attending the tarot club for the first time, almost didn't even know what the forsaken land of the gods and the city of Silver were. Fortunately, the hidden sage had mentioned them briefly in previous lessons. The mysterious purple in Katlia's eyes seemed to solidify. She seemed to have forgotten Queen Mystic's admonition to let her play on her own and desperately wanted to share everything she saw at the tarot club with her mother. This was truly too terrifying. She felt she couldn't handle it. Cough. The fool really wanted to cough awkwardly, but he couldn't. Even though he had been mentally prepared, when this moment arrived, Klein still felt intense embarrassment, especially with the actual person watching from below, smiling at him. This made it hard for the fool to accept such genuine gratitude. You should thank another member present. If it weren't for Angel, the city of Silver wouldn't have seen the sun rise again. The fool waved his hand dismissively, acting as if he claimed no credit. Derek the son was stunned. He hadn't expected Angel to be involved. Clearly, his rank wasn't high enough. The city of Silver's 6-member council knew that the fool had a divine envoy, but Little Sun, being a low sequence, hadn't been explicitly informed of this news. I temporarily traded for the scroll of the gods from the Abraham family. This sealed artifact can briefly recreate a portion of a deity's power. If it weren't for Mr. Fool's existence, this scroll wouldn't have been able to unleash its true value. Shah nodded reservedly. He was merely a tool person holding the scroll. All greatness belonged to Mr. Fool. He was just a spectator quietly observing from below, occasionally tipping some gold coins. Scroll of the gods. So that's what it meant. Furs was the first to realize. She cast a slightly resentful glance at Shah beside her. So it was such a dangerous item. Neither you nor teacher told me anything except the name. Furs was very sad. She should have known early on, but now she had to be surprised along with everyone else. And this guy's lips were really sealed. When they were on vacation in Byam, he didn't mention anything related to it at all. The fool used the scroll of the gods, special properties to project more power into the real world. No wonder his recovery seemed to accelerate, and he could even pull Beyonders of the pirate general level above the gray mist. Alger looked at Angel with a complicated expression, recalling the 2 paper balls he chose to eat after Angel had a slight offense against the fool. Angel is probably the most deeply influenced by the fool, otherwise, it's unlikely he would actively help the fool do such dangerous things. Alger sighed in his heart, remembering a saying, never trust the benevolence of gods, but rather their power. Thankfully, I don't have Angel's value. Justice Audrey also had a look of mingled surprise and excitement, even impolitely reaching out and grabbing Angel's wrist. She shouldn't have done this, but the mere thought that Mr. Angel, as Mr. Fool's divine envoy, might have used that miraculous sealed artifact to recreate Mr. Fool's divine power and save the city of Silver from darkness, filled her heart with uncontrollable excitement. She really wanted to pester Angel right now and have him tell her all about the story. Emlyn the Moon, however, was fine. He didn't care much about the city of Silver, and he had a high degree of goodwill and confidence in the Fool, who might be on par with the Ancestor, and Angel, who understood the Sanguine very well. At this moment, he leaned back calmly in his chair, maintaining his usual pride. As for the Hermit Lady, she really wanted to call the police right now. Justice Audrey also had a look of mingled surprise and excitement, even impolitely reaching out and grabbing Angel's wrist. She shouldn't have done this, but the mere thought that Mr. Angel, as Mr. Fool's divine envoy, might have used that miraculous sealed artifact to recreate Mr. Fool's divine power and save the city of Silver from darkness, filled her heart with uncontrollable excitement. She really wanted to pester Angel right now and have him tell her all about the story. Emlyn the Moon, however, was fine. He didn't care much about the city of Silver, and he had a high degree of goodwill and confidence in the Fool, who might be on par with the Ancestor, and Angel, who understood the Sanguine very well. At this moment, he leaned back calmly in his chair, maintaining his usual pride. As for the Hermit Lady, she really wanted to call the police right now. Chapter 300, Hair-Raising. Zero-level sealed artifact. The Angel family Abraham. Forsaken land of the gods, divine power. These were all somewhat challenging Hermit Catlia's capacity to endure. She thought it was just a Beander gathering. What in the world were they talking about? Catlia took a deep breath and chose to observe in silence, trying her best to adapt to the rhythm of the Tarot Club. Derek the son also understood the reasoning. He turned to thank the Angel. The reason he hadn't thought of it before wasn't that little son lacked thinking ability, he was simply normal, which was why he hadn't considered it. After all, who would have thought that such a world-changing miracle wasn't Mr. Fool's direct intervention? Mr. Fool only made a slight move through his blessed, which was the limit of what little son could imagine. Not telling you in advance was to avoid affecting your normal life. Sha'ur nodded and waved for Derek to sit down. He felt that little son's current life was visibly bright and didn't need to bear too many halos or pressures. A sun would always shine. Derek the son understood the Angel's words very well. Angel was doing something important. A special greeting from him would have seemed strange, and Derek felt he couldn't quite handle it. Once a Beander approaches the threshold of demi-godhood and successfully crosses it, they will possess a certain divinity. At this point, the acting method is still viable, but if there is faith as an anchor, it can better alleviate madness and reduce the risk of losing control. This is also why those secular demigods don't completely seclude themselves and occasionally remain active. Sha'ur shared some experience on advancing to demi-godhood with everyone, then gently patted Audrey's hand, signaling the young lady to release his wrist. The demand for faith at sequence 4 wasn't too great, but having it was definitely better than not having it. I am also very grateful that Mr. Fool is willing to let me divert a portion of the faith. Sha'ur smiled as he looked at the Fool. In the city of Silver alone, he had indeed diverted the Fool's faith. As for the other city-states that didn't believe in the Fool, they were his, outside the scope. How could you say that? You're like a professional manager, using the Fool's name to list the company and raise stock prices. Who's the legal representative? Fool. Klein felt that the legal representative couldn't possibly be him. He hadn't personally intervened, so even if things went wrong, he wouldn't be the one taking the blame. This is the result of your own efforts. Mr. Fool still maintained his indifferent demeanor. He subtly glanced at the faintly flickering crimson star. In any case, he had enough faith for his advancement to demigodhood. This explanation allowed the other members of the Tarot Club to more or less understand the Angel's motive. They felt that the Angel didn't want to conflict with the 7 Orthodox churches on the North and South continent, which was why he chose to cultivate his faith in the forsaken land of the gods, an extra-legal zone. During this time, Derek the son also didn't say anything that might keep Mr. Fool awake at night. With the angel's observation, the atmosphere of the gathering was quite harmonious. "Mr. Fool, I'm out of town and only managed to get one page of Rosal's diary." After Audrey listened with great interest to some of the short stories shared by the angel and the son, she once again turned to the head of the bronze long table and spoke. "Diary. How do you know it's a diary?" "Hermit," Catlia was stunned. Shouldn't only she and the queen know this? How did everyone here know? Is this the good change the queen mentioned? Recalling the incomprehensible Rosal at the end of Bernadette's reply, Catlia always felt that the queen already knew in advance. So who exactly is this fool? Why can he understand Rosal's diary? Catlia should have been horrified, but now a strong curiosity arose in her heart. The fool shouldn't be Emperor Rosal, right? The emperor wouldn't need to collect his own diary. Is it an existence closely related to the emperor? Even more closely than the queen, is that possible? Klein looked at this issue's Rosal's diary. It contained the emperor's gossip, which Klein criticized, and then he read the ancient god legends provided by Little Sun. These legends introduced the subordinate gods of those ancient gods, such as Nightmare Dragon, Alzuhad, the child of Dragon of Imagination, Anquelt, and the god of luck, Calamity Queen, etc., who were subordinate to Elf King Sua. Klein glanced at the Book of Calamities on the table. He wasn't stupid. The book left by his fellow countryman, the Elf King, made no secret of its intention to revive. Considering how much time had passed and that this book could still circulate into the hands of a transmigrator, the Elf King's resurrection plan likely still worked. Elf King Sua, as described in mythology, was closest to the current Lord of Storms. This ancient god definitely had a deep connection with the storm pathway, but now the storm pathway has a true god. Even if his fellow countrymen revived, he would at most be sequenced too, and he wouldn't dare show his face. The adjacent pathways to the Sailor Storm pathway are the Reader pathway, Bard pathway, Spectator pathway, and Secret Supplicant pathway. These were also confirmed in Rosal's diary. The superiors of 3 of these pathways are the 3 great Orthodox churches, and the superior of one pathway is the true creator. Klein asked himself, if he could freely choose resurrection, his initial configuration, he would definitely choose the Spectator pathway, which didn't yet have a god. If he had once been an ancient god, he certainly wouldn't fear a king of angels compared to facing a true god. Rosal's diary mentioned that the Spectator pathway sequence 1 is called Author. The king of angels of the Spectator pathway has the characteristic that, whatever is said, will be known. Sealed Artifact 008 also has this characteristic, and this sealed artifact seems to manifest as an author. In Zangwil, there hasn't been any news for a long time. Even divination yields no information, as if he were dead. Klein recalled the dream-like place he was accidentally drawn into in Tingen City. He still remembered that Ince at the time had his chest directly pierced by a tail. Sealed Artifact 008 seemed to have come alive, transforming into a humanoid creature with golden vertical pupils. When he divined afterward, that person could even peek at his divination, which was completely illogical. How could he have detected his divination in the future at that time? Klein was already sweating profusely by the time he reached this point in his deduction. The other party had called out the title, Fool, at that time and even warned him to be careful of the Spectator. If, assuming, that time was his fellow countryman resurrecting through some means. A living sealed artifact 008. If that really was the resurrected Elf King. Then this the Book of Calamities. Klein's face was a little pale. In Tingen initially, due to the lack of information, he simply didn't realize what was happening. Now, reading these ancient god myths, he gradually connected them all together. Chapter 301. Fellow countrymen, don't mess around. How did the Book of Calamities end up in his hands? Coincidence? Accident? Klein felt a bit of PTSD. This was Angel's gain, Angel. Angel recently seemed to give off a feeling of a spectator. When did this start? If he remembered correctly, in the early Tarot Club meetings, Miss Justice, as a spectator, had a dragon as her mystical symbol, while Angel's main symbol was an eye, wasn't it? That's right, when did Angel start exhibiting abilities and characteristics similar to a spectator? It seems that ever since then, Angel has become even more mysterious. It's one thing for low sequence, but now he seems to have even become a demigod, and his specific pathway hasn't been clarified. He also hasn't sought any Beander materials at the Tarot Club. If he is already a demigod, why hasn't my spiritual consumption for maintaining the Tarot Club skyrocketed? This was like opening a Pandora's box. The more Klein thought about it, the more suspicious Angel seemed. He even suspected that Angel had become a manipulated tool to deliver the Book of Calamities. To be more extreme, is the current Angel still the same Angel as before? The Fool looked up at Angel. Angel noticed the Fool's gaze, nodded politely, and then shifted his eyes. A simple interaction, yet it left the Fool's mind somewhat chaotic. Angel couldn't be a demigod, otherwise, the sudden increase in spiritual consumption would surely be apparent. If Angel isn't a demigod, even if he's a Sequence 5, can he truly rely on a zero-level sealed artifact to make the sun illuminate the City of Silver again? If the Scroll of the Gods can reproduce a portion of a deity's power, whose power is it reproducing? The ancient sun god. Recalling the high-definition image of the Elf King confronting the ancient sun god he saw in the Book of Calamities, Klein leaned back against the chair, a feeling of giving up suddenly rising in his heart. What kind of tarot club is this? Maybe it should just be disbanded. He seemed to have inadvertently caused the death of the real Angel, but he was completely unaware. When did Angel's crimson star get bigger? Why had he never noticed it before? Why didn't these details connect? The Fool had given up to the point of not speaking. The only thing he could still be thankful for was that he shouldn't be on his fellow countryman's menu. This mysterious gray fog space was closely linked to the seer pathway, so it probably wasn't on his fellow countryman's menu either. Rosal chose the artisan pathway and thus had no connection with the gray fog, so the Elf King should be the same. You may now communicate freely. Klein leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He recalled the traces of the elves he had inquired about from Alger. It is said that Sonia Island and the more turbulent sea areas of the Dixie Bay were originally gathering places for elves. The Rorstad archipelago might also be included, but now elves are rarely seen. It can only be confirmed that they are not extinct. Lacking faith, choosing to spread faith in the forsaken land of the gods where the Orthodox Church cannot supervise. It all seems to fit. Mr. Fool just wants to destroy now. As free communication began, Alger and Audrey, these senior members, first thought of concealing their identities in front of the newcomers. Even the most outgoing Miss Justice, when communicating with World about clues for the psychiatrist characteristic, did not mention too much personal information. Anyway, Audrey was not in a hurry. She knew Susie was certainly not in a hurry for this characteristic. Alger was the same. He even regretted wearing his Storm Church robe to the Tarot Club. This was originally nothing, as the old members basically knew he was related to the Storm Church. And as the captain of the Blue Vengeance, he also had to regularly wear his clerical robe to lead the crew in mass, otherwise, he would be reported by subordinates who wanted to advance. The Storm Church was always wary of members who spent long periods at sea impersonating pirates, as the Lord of Storms had never issued an oracle to exclude pirates from believers. Even if one truly defected from the Storm Church and became a great pirate roaming the seas, they could still believe in the Lord of Storms. Theoretically, one could even establish their own branch church, as long as the scale wasn't too large, operating as a small group, or simply taking over an existing one. The Lord of Storms might still habitually respond to prayers. People who did this appeared every few decades, and the outstanding ones even had the chance to become demigods. This only required some extra funding. There were always irritable old brothers who lost in internal competition and would have crooked ideas. Even the high-ranking members of the Storm Church themselves couldn't be sure how many local churches, on those lower-tier colonial islands and overseas colonies still maintained devout faith. Since it couldn't be hidden, he might as well make the best of it and use his identity as a Storm Church clergyman to cover up his identity as a captain. Alger made up his mind. Powerful figures like pirate generals, whom he might encounter, were quite dangerous, and his pirate identity needed to be concealed. Mr. Hanged Man, I have prepared the funds. When can you get that Sanguine Baron's inheritance? You mentioned last time that it was in the hands of a great pirate. Moon Emlyn turned his head, his voice filled with the confidence brought by money and suppressed excitement. Alger looked at Moon Emlyn, speechless and helpless. You really didn't need to add that last sentence. What about the tacit understanding we old members have in front of newcomers? I can get it this week. £4,500, no problem. Alger was expressionless. For the sake of the commission, he temporarily forgave Moon. If you hadn't asked, it wouldn't have been a problem. Emlyn's excitement dissipated a bit. Thinking of his doll wives at home, he cautiously asked, "Can it be a little cheaper?" This was strange. He had already accepted the price, but Emlyn was a bit hesitant. "I'll try to get you a better price." Alger felt even more speechless internally. Hermit Catlia smiled as she watched this scene, discerning that this was an underage or newly adult sanguine. She saw that Sun needed the fruit of the radiant spirit tree and responded, using it in exchange for the history of the City of Silver. After Catlia received Sun's payment, she became even more certain of the existence of the Forsaken Land of the Gods. One must know that this was a place Emperor Rosal had searched for in vain during his lifetime, a place said to hide the ultimate answers to all things. And was the fool also planning something in the Forsaken Land of the Gods? Does the fool know about the queen behind me? If he needs Rosal's diary, the queen has the complete set of diaries in her hands. What is he waiting for? Catlia felt she couldn't predict the thoughts of such a person, but the queen was also an angel, and if the queen was willing to give up some things, she could also get help from the hidden sage, so there was no need to be too afraid. Although Catlia herself was a bit scared, she still had great confidence in her queen. If she were truly desperate, she could even gain the power of the hidden sage, let alone the queen. A significant reason why the Moses ascetic order so devoutly believed in the hidden sage was that this evil god was truly generous. Chapter 302, I Stand at the End of Time. The Tarot Club was about to conclude. Mr. Fool hesitated whether to ask Angel to stay for a private chat. Although there was insufficient evidence, as a seer, a profession that trusts intuition, he always had various suspicions. Watching the crimson light gradually fade and the ancient palace become empty save for him, he still hadn't made a decision. This wasn't indecisiveness on his part, rather, if his guess were true, the gap between them would be too vast. He could tease Rosal about his embarrassing past while reading Rosal's diary, but if he were to truly return to Emperor Rosal's most glorious era, even with the shared identity of being from the same hometown, he still couldn't cross that barrier. The same was true now. Fool might be able to maintain his demeanor in front of an ancient god, but if he were to personally reveal his identity as the fool, he would just be an ordinary Sequence 6, unable to even return to his biggest backer, the Night Church. He would then only be able to discuss hometown camaraderie with an elf king who once ruled this world. Alas! Klein sighed. He looked at the Book of Calamities on the table, feeling increasingly uneasy, and promptly tossed it into the junk pile, using the power of the gray fog space to suppress it. Then, he began to review all his experiences from Tingen until now. After leaving Tingen, the obvious feeling of manipulation under Ins Zangwill's influence was gone. However, this didn't rule out the possibility that the other party's methods were more sophisticated. A long time had passed since he arrived in Backland until now, reaching the Rorstad archipelago. There hadn't been anything too coincidental, it seemed. If it were the worst-case scenario, the other party wouldn't need to forcefully interfere or manipulate him, especially since his strongest equipment was still sponsored by Angel. Klein glanced at the scepter of life in the junk pile. He sighed again, but he still made a decision in his heart. No matter what, the fool's persona must absolutely not be dropped if it could be avoided. As long as it wasn't exposed, he was still the fool. It was just a codename, after all, and he had never claimed to be a god. Didn't everyone in the Tarot Club have a codename? So, it shouldn't matter, right? In the real world, Sha'ur opened his eyes. At the Tarot Club, he had more or less noticed Mr. Fool's odd behavior. Although he had the ability to make the fool continuously ignore these things, it would require long-term hypnosis and fooling. He had no grudge with Klein, so there was no need to toy with his mind like that. Serving the fool could be considered pre-acting as an attendant of mysteries, a sequence 1 of the fool pathway. Fooling the fool seemed to have no effect. Whatever he thinks, given his current understanding, anything he can come up with is acceptable. Sha'ur gently shook his head. He picked up a book from the shelf, waiting for night to fall. When he saw the state of sea god Cavatua, Sha'ur could confirm that the elves were doing well in this era. A domesticated sea snake, ignoring external forces, could even fight a legitimate sea king of the Storm Church to a draw. It's getting messier and messier. When the crimson moonlight spilled over the sea, Sha'ur closed the book in his hand. His figure blurred, and he traveled through the collective subconscious ocean to the waters near Dillenius Island, where the Golden Dream, returning from Sonia Island, was temporarily anchored. In Vice Admiral Iceberg's captain's cabin, Edwina, dressed in conservative ladies' pajamas, put down the book in her hand. She showed no great displeasure or surprise at Sha'ur's sudden appearance in the room. Her beautiful eyes remained primarily rational. This is a book from the fourth epic. A souvenir. Sha'ur placed the book in his hand on the table and said. Edwina's eyes lit up at the words. She politely asked Sha'ur, "Is there something I can help you with? I'd like to see your collection." Sha'ur briefly scanned Edwina in her pajamas, not lingering, but still offered a compliment. "Of course. I'd be happy to. I just didn't expect you to come at night." Edwina smiled. She enjoyed opening her collection to people of certain erudition, appreciating them together, and sharing the stories of each item. During the day, it might be a bit troublesome. "Don't look at me like this, I really would throw your crew into the sea." Sha'ur flexed his wrist. Even though bullying ordinary people was a bit embarrassing, kicking the lovesick fellows on the Golden Dream into the sea was quite amusing. Was Edwina really that good? Sha'ur couldn't empathize, perhaps it was because they were at sea. He wasn't afraid to interact with Vice Admiral Iceberg, she was one of his own. He casually looked at Edwina and asked, "Are you back to pick up Danitz?" "Partially. Gehrman wants to meet me, and I also come regularly to sell some goods." Edwina led Sha'ur onto the deck, pointing to the cabins below and saying, "We have some cooperation with the Rorstad Archipelago's resistance, providing them with aid in areas such as grain and cloth." I didn't smell the faint scent of gunpowder in the air." Sha'ur's impolite retort was taken as a joke by Edwina. As long as the Rorstad Archipelago remained under the control of the Storm Church, grain, cloth, and firearms would continuously be sent from other parts of the North Continent. The intellectual and beautiful pirate general looked at Sha'ur curiously and asked, "Senior sent word that he's willing to pay £5,000 for the giant's key I discovered earlier. Are you here for that key too?" "No, the value of a key depends on what it can open. It has different values in different people's eyes. However, it won't be hard to sell. If someone wants to buy it, you can even raise the price a bit more." Sha'ur denied. He thought that Klein should pay for this money later. Money felt like money in Klein's hands. Sha'ur didn't enjoy spending it as much himself. The two walked up the stairs. The patrolling sailors on the way only smiled foolishly and looked at Edwina a few more times, completely oblivious to Sha'ur, who was conversing with their captain. Psychological invisibility was always so effective that Edwina couldn't help but ask for guidance. Sha'ur didn't hold back, briefly explaining the relevant knowledge. Edwina learned quickly, and the ability she simulated, though not complete invisibility, was already able to focus the attention of those ordinary sailors on her face, rather than her conservative nightgown. Entering the collection room, Edwina lit a lamp and said very openly, "These are the proofs of our past treasure hunts. You can admire them freely, and if there's anything you like, I might consider giving it to you." Sha'ur nodded in response. He looked at the book bound in parchment on the table, its dark brown cover bearing a line of ancient Fasak, Grossel's Travels. Chapter 303, Miscellaneous Notes and Observations. Grossel's Travels, it really has been a long time since I last saw it. Sha'ur's fingers caressed the surface of the dark brown cover. He wasn't particularly curious about the City of Miracles. At his current level, such a hideout might only serve a decorative purpose. According to the early settings of this world, an ordinary angel could easily discover the City of Miracles with this book, as it was quite open. It welcomed all outsiders. We found this in a shipwreck at the bottom of the sea. It was submerged for about 165 years, yet it shows no signs of damage. Edwina first introduced its origin, then continued, it records a story about a giant named Grossel who decides to hunt the Lich King of the Northern Kingdom, a powerful undead creature capable of reanimating the dead as spirits to fight for him. Along the way, he meets many companions, a female elf, a devout ascetic, a sanguine viscount, a Solomon Empire noble, a Loan soldier. The story stops abruptly just as they, with the help of both elves and humans, bypass a massive undead army and are about to confront the Lich King. The rest of the content cannot be accessed. Do you have any ideas? A rare hint of anticipation appeared in Edwina's usually rational eyes. She had been studying this travelogue for a long time but had gained nothing. Because this travelogue is waiting for the footman. Sha'ur flipped through the story in the travelogue, complaining about his own laziness. If he remembered correctly, when he first got this book, the story he wrote was about the destruction of human civilization, and the newly introduced war between elves and dragons, wasn't it? At that time, to deal with the dragon of imagination's negative personality, he introduced elves into the story to slaughter dragons, dismantling the dragon of imagination's negative personality's anchors. Later, during the stabilization phase, he had both sides devour each other. The conflict between the Storm and the Visionary was relatively safe, and some human NPCs who survived the previous story arc also had dragon blood in them. Then, the calamity of the undead was staged. Ideas. Didn't those pulp fiction novels published by Emperor Rosal in his early years often feature plots where blood was used to acknowledge a master? Do you want to try it? Sha'ur placed the book back on the table, speaking casually. You know about such things. Then you should also know that Emperor Rosal never wrote anything similar again after that. Edwina recalled the "Don't bully a young man into poverty, 30 years east of the river" stories she read as a child, feeling a bit nostalgic for that time. But she didn't intend to follow Sha'ur's suggestion. In the mysterious world, blood could be a medium for curses, and she wouldn't be so careless. The characters in this book span a very wide range. It's clearly fictional, yet it features nobles from the Solomon Empire and soldiers from the Loan Kingdom. Don't you find that strange? Would nobles from the Solomon Empire and soldiers from the Loan Kingdom appear in the same story? Sha'ur admired the other collectibles, such as ancient gold coins displayed in picture frames. There were two styles. One was dark gold, seemingly made of two uneven half circles joined together, very asymmetrical, with a pointed crown engraved on the surface. The other was white gold, with different numbers engraved on it and a magnificent scepter on the back. I've also considered that question. Normal stories are rarely written this way. It might not have been completed in one period, but rather written by different people in different periods. I've suspected it might control the holder to complete the rest of the story, but I've had it for so long and haven't been affected. Edwina offered her thoughts, a slight regret in her gaze towards Grossel's travels. If this notebook had shown some Beander qualities, attempting to influence her, she might have understood its secrets better, instead of being at a loss as she was now. It seems you're quite unwilling, literary girl. Secrets will always be unveiled one day. If Edwina Edwards doesn't uncover it, there will be other Edwardses to hold this book later. If the content doesn't change after dozens of Edwardses, then selling it as an antique is also a good option. This is the mindset of a long-lived species, everything leaves a trace in the face of time. Sha'ur continued to admire the other collectibles, not paying much attention to the giant royal court key. He didn't need a key to go to the giant royal court, whoever wanted to buy it could buy it. Edwina pursed her lips when she heard dozens of Edwardses. While Sha'ur was right, she didn't particularly want to engage in that conversation, until she saw Sha'ur pick up a seemingly ordinary red and white ball among the various collectibles. Can I have this? Sha'ur weighed it in his hand, feeling a slight temptation. You can, but its effect might be. Edwina recognized the item. It was found on a fourth epic shipwreck. Its material, processed with special craftsmanship, could contain some weak nature spirits. There were some records of it in the Knowledge Church's internal archives, but its practical value wasn't high. It was a product eliminated by history. This wasn't because later generations had better inventions, but because this item, from its initial design, was intended for ordinary people who hadn't embarked on the Beander path, or were low-sequence Beyonders. Its characteristics were simple operation, low price, portability, and ease of popularization. However, in the current era, the transcendent and reality are separated. Beyonders who have access to the Beander path have alternatives, while Beyonders explore on their own, and ordinary people cannot access the mysterious. Such a product of the old era was naturally eliminated. The raw materials for this product are probably extinct as well. Its low cost was also based on the long-term interaction between the spirit world and reality. Its design is quite appealing. And its style doesn't quite fit with your collection room, Sha'ur said, putting away the red and white ball in his hand. In this era, opportunities to use a red and white ball were indeed few. Those who could wander in the city were basically harmless nature spirits, invisible to ordinary people, let alone attempting to capture them. You seem very familiar with this kind of thing. Edwina walked over and asked. I've seen it in some casual books. It's said that in the fourth epoch, nature spirits were sold by weight. Sha'ur said, suppressing a laugh. You've really seen similar records. I've seen in some documents that nightwatchers in some villages would capture spirits at night. I thought it was just role-playing at the time. Edwina was startled, connecting it to many fragmented records she had seen about the fourth epoch. The historical materials within the Knowledge Church were somewhat systematic, but they mostly recorded major historical events, as well as the past glory and splendor of the upper nobility. However, there was not much record of the specific living conditions of the lower classes at that time. Chapter 304, The Feeling of a Pillar. Fourth Epoch. The Solomon Empire had been established for over 200 years, and the world was peaceful and prosperous. As humanity's status became increasingly stable, the sea folk, dragons, and other leaderless races were largely carved up. The White Emperor, who acted earlier, got a relatively large piece of the pie. The sea folk had originally followed the elves, and as for the dragons, as the saying goes, a group of dragons without a leader. The situation on the North and South continent was relatively stable, and the conflicts among the gods were more concentrated in the spirit world. The hermit gained control of more than half of the underworld. This didn't face much interference because the other deities didn't want to see death truly become a god. However, he only managed to secure about 60%, because Salinger was, after all, a king of angels of the death pathway. While other deities didn't want Salinger to become death, they also didn't want the hermit to completely control the underworld, and the hermit's energy was tied up with other matters. Compared to the underworld, the spirit world was a much larger domain, and the hermit secured even less control there. Although in the current era, very few beings could extend their reach into the spirit world, these entities could easily cause trouble. The hermit only managed to secure about 30%, any more would invite intermittent harassment from other deities. At least Feng, Ji, and Bai would certainly be happy to do so. With non-friendly units blocking the door externally and friendly units hindering internally. Even as the esteemed hermit, relying solely on himself, he couldn't further expand his market share. The Black Emperor Solomon, once constrained, learned the joy of constraint after achieving unification. The Solomon First Empire now ruled the entire North Continent and even encroached upon parts of the South Continent. The Black Emperor was relatively content. The empire's order became more entrenched in the North Continent, and his control over the empire as a whole grew stronger. This included the few churches remaining within the empire's borders. The stronger the imperial power, the weaker the ecclesiastical power, the stronger the mundane side, the more the mystical side would be suppressed to a certain extent. He also, through the hermit's connection with the White Emperor, indirectly extended his order into the spirit world via the hermit and the Seven Lights. Although this process faced significant obstacles, he still managed to steal a portion of the spirit world's authority. The Solomon Empire was a dual-sun reign, with two emperors co-ruling. The White Emperor shared the Black Emperor's authority in the mundane world, able to invoke the power of order to suppress his opponents. The Black Emperor could likewise share the White Emperor's authority in the spirit world, usurping power from the mystical side to compensate for his own shortcomings. This was actually unfair, but as the pinnacle of the lawyer pathway, the Black Emperor naturally had ways to equalize these matters. Moreover, he had the loyal Zoroaster family under him, capable of advising the emperor and solving problems. Solomon was also confident that the hermit would not turn against him over a small distribution of interests under the table, maintaining their alliance, which benefited both divine emperors. Solomon wanted to wait. The longer it dragged on, the greater his advantage. Mr. Dor, a king of angels who should have genuinely possessed some authority over the spirit world, chose to stand alone in the face of such scheming. He simply acted as if he had no authority over the spirit world, focusing instead on the astral world, and would travel through the cosmos whenever he had time. The auxiliary materials for advancing to Sequence 0 Dor required mastery of astronomical, geographical, and cultural knowledge of at least 3 star systems. Mr. Dor had to figure these out himself. He certainly wasn't participating in spirit world affairs. And the divine wars had never ceased. The hermit was almost constantly fighting against Feng, Ji, and Bai in rotation, and also had to take time to suppress death in the underworld. The White Tauren was a problem. Although the hermit had the authority to conceal himself, the spirit world was open source and public. The hermit's acquisition of spirit world authority was not an inheritance, but required him to influence the spirit world with part of his own spirit, inscribing spiritual imprints on every aspect of the spirit world, which always caused the progress bar to stall. He could inherit, but not truly inherit. He also had to grind his proficiency himself. If he wanted to achieve a minor Lord of the Spirit World title and raise his authority to a certain level, one of the three gods would come to challenge him. After a battle, either his spiritual imprint would be purified by the sun, or the information flow scattered in the spirit world would be destroyed by the storm magnetic field. The hermit would not seek help for such harassment, and reliable allies like the Black Emperor, the fallen god, and the Earth Mother would also not intervene. If suppressing death was a consensus among the gods, then suppressing the hermit was likewise so. Human nature is just like that. Even if they didn't touch the spirit world, they didn't want the hermit's control over the spirit world to be too high. Moreover, the hermit's progress seemed a bit too fast. Even though he hadn't yet transcended the realm of deities, he already possessed some of the fallen god's might. This was earned through battle. Since the hermit's debut, the friction between the fallen god and the three gods Feng, Ji, and Bai had considerably eased. This day was still the same. The hermit seemed to be the true death, radiating a cool-toned glow. In the spirit world, he effortlessly handled the Lord of Storms, the combat in charge of the all five families. As the seven lights flowed, everything they touched was decomposed, annihilated, nothing was left untouched, nothing was immune. He completely suppressed the Lord of Storms. The Lord of Storms, Leodoros, breastplate was somewhat damaged. Even in the spirit world, he could still stir up monstrous waves, but it was meaningless. The hermit opened a portal, and a great rainbow bridge constructed of seven-colored pure light. All the waves were expelled. A violent storm, powerful enough to overturn a continent, was fixed by the seven pure lights. The lightning strikes, carrying matter, moving at light speed, and electrified, also dissolved in the cool-toned pure light after the seven lights merged. The matter within was decomposed, the energy prematurely depleted, the mystery lost its effect, and the laws of reality were rewritten. The hermit's authority, combined with that of some paragons, meant there was nothing that could not be decomposed. Looking at the spirit world, which remained stable and rapidly recovered after the bombardment, Sha'ur seemed to finally understand a little what a pillar meant. A pillar of a realm. Boom! A lightning spear imbued with divine power pierced the distracted hermit. The hermit's body disintegrated, slowly dissipating. However, Leodoros showed no joy. His aura was as violent and chaotic as a storm. In an instant, an electromagnetic storm swept through, indiscriminately clearing all information structures nearby. But it was useless. After the electromagnetic storm swept through, the hermit's figure reconstructed from the void once more. He threw a punch, and the entire spirit world seemed to resonate slightly. His own authority shifted slightly, knowledge possessed power, and information likewise possessed weight. The weight of a single punch made even Leodoro retreat uncontrollably. With a wave of his hand, the hermit applied an invisible repulsion to Leodoro, making the Lord of Storms feel heavily restricted, as if a deep-sea creature had come to shallow waters. The change in water pressure made his whole body uncomfortable, and then he was again repelled by subsequent attacks. The hermit's authority alone was not enough to leverage the power of the spirit world to restrict an equal true god, but with the Black Emperor's order added, it became possible. The power the Black Emperor had snuck into the spirit world through loopholes was quite effective. Chapter 305, Stealing. Taking. Sha'ur could not rely on a single basic attack to cripple the Lord of Storms, this exceeded the scope of a deity. Although he couldn't casually inflict severe damage upon the Lord of Storms, he could casually suppress and beat him. How could Leodoro be willing to appear as pathetic as the god of knowledge and wisdom had in his early years? But it was useless. Attacks targeting an individual were either casually blocked by the hermit, who dissolved them by instantly converting them into information states, or were shattered by the use of the same offensive methods. For attacks targeting a group, the hermit could use the spirit world to share a portion of the damage, regardless of whether it was wind, rain, thunder, or lightning, all were neutralized by circulating pure light. Leodoro had considered every method. He even wanted to replicate the battle in the Forsaken Land of the Gods, directly shattering the spirit world in a specific area, but he couldn't. Where the hermit was active, the toughness and strength of the spirit world were enhanced. The surrounding spirit world space seemed to come alive, remaining steadfast regardless of external impact. Bang, bang, bang. Leodoro was interrupted repeatedly. Every time he was about to charge up a counterattack, a hermit would appear nearby, delivering a basic attack that instantly broke his concentration. Leodoro seemed to be fighting not just the hermit, but the entire spirit world space. His perception was delayed and suppressed, yet the hermit seemed ubiquitous, striking precisely at every point that caused Leodoro discomfort. Even if Leodoro traded injuries, forcibly taking out a hermit, a moment later, a perfectly intact hermit would reappear. The spirit world is ultimately composed of information. Even though the hermit had consumed the high-level characteristics of the perfected one pathway, he remained a purely informational being. He currently controlled partial authority over the spirit world and partial authority over the underworld. On his own turf, he seemed integrated with the world, and any physical loss could be rapidly replenished. Trying to kill an informational being within the sea of information. During the first few divine battles, the hermit even pretended to struggle in order to adapt to their respective methods. Now, the hermit raised his right hand, and the nearby spirit world space began to stir. A powerful information storm directly flung the disoriented Lord of Storms away. He stopped the combo, giving Leodoro a chance to breathe. Standing still, his feet treading the void, he seemed to be waiting for the opponent to make the first move, giving him an opportunity for a full display of power. "You are seeking death." Leodoro was so enraged by the hermit's dismissive posture that his hair stood on end. Even if there had been a trend of suppression earlier, it was because the hermit always used precision to break through large areas, deflecting, maneuvering, and using targeted attacks. He had never been suppressed in a pure clash of strength. Leodoro grasped the trident in his hand. At this moment, the five great oceans seemed to sense the Lord of Storm's wrath. Leaving the spirit world, he stood on the surface of the violent sea, and lightning that illuminated the entire violent sea surged frantically toward the spirit world. The destructive power Leodoro unleashed this time far surpassed his previous efforts. The hermit did not move, allowing the lightning storm to engulf him. Although authorities are relative, the disparity is absolute. This high-intensity attack lasted for a day and a night. Even a deity felt profound exhaustion. Lightning chased the hermit throughout the spirit world, destroying every mental imprint and piece of informational data the hermit left behind. However, after the storm subsided, the hermit reappeared exactly where he was. His figure was somewhat ethereal, but within a few breaths, he was fully recovered, supplemented by the spirit world. Currently, the proper door pathway has no deity. In the spirit world, the hermit is half a true god of the door pathway. Perhaps the god of constraint could sever the hermit's connection with the spirit world, but would not dare. Without targeted means, if the hermit concealed himself, the slightly weaker Lord of Storms, no matter how hard he tried, could not fundamentally threaten the hermit. If it weren't for the danger of the cosmos, Leodoro wouldn't even catch the hermit's dust. If an attack does not carry the effect of death or instant execution, lacks corresponding authority restrictions, and the pure physical damage fails to break a certain threshold upon impact, how could it hope to severely wound the hermit? My turn. The hermit reached out his hand. Streams of circulating information formed dark spiral thorns, carrying the authority of either death or destruction. They crossed space, directly locking onto the Lord of Storms above the violent sea. Everything the Lord of Storms lacked, he possessed, be it death or chaos. HMPH. Leodoro snorted coldly. Seawater transformed into giant hands, scattering the spiral thorns that seemed to grow out of thin air. The hermit was not anxious. The hand behind his back converted the power of the spirit world, restoring his spirituality and strength. Time flowed. The Lord of Storms was already feeling exhaustion and annoyance. His previous pride had turned into deep frustration. The hermit could evade most attacks by maneuvering within the spirit world. Could the Lord of Storms do the same? Even if he hid in the deep ocean, he still had to endure the attacks he was meant to receive. The five great oceans cannot encompass the spirit world, but the spirit world covers reality outside the Forsaken Land of the Gods. If the hermit didn't want to stop, the Lord of Storms could only endure endless beatings. Leodoro was no fool either. There was once an ancient god who wielded similar authority, the previous death, Phoenix progenitor, Garagari. At that time, the three ancient gods of the still united pan-human faction hadn't truly suffered much. Since the Elf King could do it, he certainly could too. A tyrant could never surrender voluntarily. Therefore, Leodoro charged into the spirit world again. He didn't believe the hermit would continue to wear him down, as that would only expose more of his own information and benefit other deities. The hermit watched the Lord of Storms approach. His own data stream shifted and reorganized, and a tyrannical yet dangerous aura rapidly expanded. The Lord of Storms' trident pierced the hermit's chest. The electric light-forged spear in the hand of the Elf King before him likewise plunged deep into the Lord of Storms' chest. This scene caused the watching deities to fall into astonishment. Clearly, none of them had expected that the hermit, after ensuring his own safety, would still choose to trade injuries with the Lord of Storms. Sha'ur pulled out the spear and kicked the slightly surprised Lord of Storms out of the spirit world. The lightning that had previously illuminated the entire violent sea reappeared, but this time, the target was the deity who commanded the domain of storms. Boom, boom, boom. The lightning did not strike in a concentrated spot, but covered the entire area, preventing any other existence from trying to reap the benefits. Sha'ur ignored the wound on his body and licked the true divine blood, dripping from the spear. A strong sense of satisfaction and pleasure surged in his heart. The knowledge contained within the blood was absorbed completely, making his mimicked Elf King form even more real. Standing in the spirit world, in the posture of a tyrant, his tyrannical aura was incredibly chaotic and dangerous, like a volcano ready to erupt at any moment. Holding the lightning-flashing spear, he alone threatened all existences on the north and south continent that surpassed Sequence 1. A full minute passed before Leodoro reappeared on the sea surface. His black armor was completely shattered, and his expression was grim. Looking at the direction the hermit had concealed himself, there was a trace of deeply hidden shock and suspicion in his eyes, besides the rage. A portion of the divine characteristics aggregated within him was missing, even if it was only a very, very small part. Chapter 306. One Life, Two Fates. Even the Lord of Storms, who was responsible for direct combat strength, was no match for the hermit. The entire spirit world, including the real world, subsequently became much calmer. The hermit's activity decreased, while the White Emperor's activity increased. The permeation of order from the Solomon Empire into the spirit world was originally an extremely favorable development, but the Black Emperor was not overly pleased. The White Emperor's prestige, which had been weakened by the Black Emperor through political means, completely rebounded. The White Emperor previously did not participate in most governmental affairs, focusing only on promoting the development of civilization, and could be considered low-key. The Black Emperor had relatively easily extended its influence to the western side of the North Continent through hereditary nobles like Tudor. However, now, even though the White Emperor had not done anything special, certain changes were subtly emerging. The most intuitive change was that the Sanguine became even more arrogant. If elves had always been self-contained, their temperaments unchanged since the founding of the Solomon Empire, then some of the Sanguine's behaviors were highly thought-provoking. The North Continent had been peaceful for quite some time. While the Black Emperor's majesty certainly remained, it lacked something compared to the hermit, who had long participated in divine wars. The Sanguine did not disrespect the Black Emperor, they were simply more confident. Previously, when managing Backland, they acted more like administrators or tax farmers, but now they directly treated Backland as their own fiefdom. Overall, the White Emperor did not obstruct the Black Emperor's efforts to strengthen the empire's internal control. In the territories of the Earth Mother Church, the God of War Church, and the Night Church, the Black Emperor also completed the consolidation of power. Routine administrative management was handled by officials selected by the Solomon Empire, and the faith of the fallen god spread smoothly across the North Continent. Over 200 years, the people of the North Continent had grown accustomed to the existence of the Solomon Empire, its laws and order, and the rule of the Solomon family. The Solomon Empire was unprecedentedly powerful, and there were many great nobles within the empire who had reached the angel rank. At this time, it was a logical development for the Black Emperor, as the ruler of the North Continent, to collect the Sequence 1 characteristic of the adjacent pathway, the Justiciar pathway. With the Hand of Order characteristic, the real-world Black Emperor, bolstered by order, would become exceptionally difficult to deal with by drawing power from order itself. But the Black Emperor itself discovered that this was not the case. The cohesion of the Solomon Empire had increased, but the power that could be drawn from order was dispersed. The White Emperor directly took nearly half of the share. Although the White Emperor rarely used this power directly, he was capable of using it, and if he faced no resistance, he could directly mobilize more than half of the order pathway's power throughout the entire empire. This put the Black Emperor in an awkward position. When the Black Emperor first conferred the title of White Emperor and ruled the entire North Continent alongside him, it was partly due to fear of the former Khonstan kingdom's strength, and partly due to self-confidence. As a deity of the order pathway and the emperor of the Solomon Empire, it believed that by merging, it would reap the greatest benefits. Originally, as time passed, the Black Emperor's control over the empire should have grown stronger, and events had indeed developed that way. The Solomon Empire's cake grew larger, yet the White Emperor was still able to take a considerable portion. As a deity of the real world and the order pathway, the nominal supreme ruler, it actually couldn't restrict the White Emperor. After over 200 years of effort by the Solomon family toward integration and unification, the White Emperor mostly chose to yield, giving up administrative management and focusing efforts on education, technology, and culture. By now, the order of the Solomon Empire had become a part of civilization, and civilization was also contained within order. It would have been fine if the deity was from another pathway, but 200 years was enough time for the hermit to learn the ways of the order pathway. This led to an awkward situation. If the White Emperor dragged his feet, the Black Emperor's combat power bonus within the empire could plummet by half. If the Black Emperor wanted to influence the hermit indirectly through the White Emperor, there would be some effect, but the deterrent would be much weaker. This was because the hermit had more paths and more choices, unlike the Black Emperor, who was relatively singular. Inside the White Emperor's palace, Shah had almost calculated most of the changes regarding the uniqueness of fate. When fate was unpredictable and full of variables, destiny was naturally chaotic and mad, but a fate that could be calculated completely was not so chaotic. Below the level of deities, the changes in fate are almost entirely predictable. A rotating halo seemed to reflect in his eyes, and with every rotation, it always displayed the points of destiny faster than the dice of destiny in his hand. Whenever he guessed correctly, the negative effects of the uniqueness in his hand were almost negligible to the White Emperor. The North Continent's biggest banker played dice, and he could roll almost whatever number he desired. An invisible hand, following the network of order, covered every aspect of the North Continent. It was difficult for fate to produce variables. In the Solomon Empire, what determined the fate of ordinary people was not the uniqueness, but the White Emperor. Although I do not possess the power of an outer deity, I can still help you accommodate the uniqueness of fate, Shah said, smiling at the god of luck, Serves, who was waiting in the Great Hall. Fate tells me that now is the opportune moment. The sequence one god of luck bowed slightly. He had only appeared because he had divined the opportunity. The ritual for becoming a deity on the fate pathway is to find the correct opportunity within the torrent of destiny. For such an abstract ritual, holding a simplified ceremony to accommodate the uniqueness would normally be quite difficult. Even in the original timeline, Klein had to use the power of an outer deity to suppress the uniqueness and help the little snake absorb it. Discard the superficial and look at the essence. During the era of the 8 ancient gods, who performed the ritual to become a deity. You know the fate pathway best, it symbolizes the chaotic side of destiny. Chaos also means madness and loss of control. What reduces madness and loss of control is the ritual. Shah tossed the dice of destiny he held, letting it float before the god of luck. Under normal circumstances, the uniqueness would try to escape, counterattack, cause chaos, and attract another king of angels from the fate pathway. But now, all variables were anticipated and blocked beforehand, and the dice obediently hovered there. While I hold it, variables cannot outrun constants, and destiny is under control. After you accommodate it, destiny will be half free. The White Emperor's words were slightly more serious, seemingly a warning. I know. The god of luck nodded and grasped the uniqueness of fate before him. He knew what the new king meant. The North Continent was not monolithic. With the White Emperor holding the uniqueness of fate, the space for destiny manipulation was small. By choosing to accommodate it, even with the White Emperor's help, there was ultimately a layer of separation, and the chains of destiny would loosen. Chapter 307, Paragon. Even luck that falls from the sky depends on whether one's fate is strong enough. And both fate and luck can be changed. Shah-Ur's lips curved into a smile. The destiny model he constructed, along with the changes in the dice of destiny over the next 30 years, directly transformed into a stream of information and was transmitted into the god of luck's brain. Even without the hermit's constant calibration, the actual effect of this model would worsen the further it went, but it was enough for the god of luck to withstand the most chaotic and disordered madness when accommodating the uniqueness of fate. Let me help you one more time. He raised a hand and pointed, using up most of the chips won from the fate gamble. The scope of the fate field that the uniqueness of fate could influence was once again restricted, shrinking from the entire North Continent to the western side of the North Continent, the traditional sphere of influence of the White Emperor. After the area was delimited, chains of order, not too strong, wrapped around it. Just assist it slightly with the power of order. After you accommodate the uniqueness, you'll still break free, won't you? After all, order has a true master. After Shah-Ur finished everything, he leaned back comfortably in his chair, watching the god of luck, who had drunk the potion and begun to accommodate the uniqueness of fate. He had less reverence for fate, mainly because of the mysteries, which constantly played tricks and stole fate, and also because his own fate was quite good. Fate was much more important than luck. The god of luck was quite lucky, but his fate wasn't good. Without Shah-Ur, even if he obtained the uniqueness of fate, it would still be for naught. He simply didn't have the fate for it. The process of the god of luck, serves, accommodating the uniqueness went rather smoothly. He was already a seasoned king of angels who had lived for several epochs, and the White Emperor had suppressed the uniqueness of fate so thoroughly that he only needed to familiarize himself with this state, and almost no accidents would occur. Shah-Ur was also willing to give away the uniqueness of fate. It was originally found by the god of luck. Now, it was merely returning to its rightful owner. Although he could suppress the uniqueness of fate, it was quite exhausting, and his research was almost complete, so he simply dropped this burden. Time passed by minute. The ripples stirred by the river of fate, when feedbacking into the real world, were suppressed by the power of order as soon as they appeared, before they could form a chain reaction. The god of luck, serves, successfully accommodated the uniqueness. The snakes of fate in his silver eyes connected to each other, forming an illusory roulette. I don't think I need to give any extra instructions. Shah-Ur was referring to Ouroboros, the snake of fate. Now that Serves had also become a king of angels, it would be very difficult to kill him, and such an old subordinate deity would not court death. We won't easily come into conflict. The god of luck, Serves, nodded. In the current situation, the angels maintained relative peace among themselves. Collective subconscious C, kingdom of imagination, Levhid. The hermit used the small amount of tyrant Beander characteristic he had picked up to create a small, tyrant sapling. Sleeve walked into the Hall of Honesty. Behind the deepest throne was a sealed bronze door, which once sealed the dragon of imagination's second personality, polluted by the chaos sea. Even though it was now vacant, there were still some residual auras in the environment. The hermit buried the sapling here, rooting it in this kingdom of imagination, nurturing it with his own flesh and blood, creating an environment suitable for cultivation. The bronze door was sealed, and illusory chains of starlight covered it, forming a layer of seal. The White Emperor's bedchamber. Shah-Ur looked at the paragon uniqueness in his hand with a slight headache. Its appearance was not fixed but constantly changing. Currently, it looked like a book. Over 200 years, with the White Emperor's status, intentional searching, and the hermit drawing attention, it wasn't difficult to obtain an ownerless, adjacent uniqueness. But uniqueness cannot be eaten directly. Non-adjacent Beander characteristics are fine. No matter how you eat them, you will go mad, so there's no need to consider the method of consumption. High-level characteristics and uniqueness of adjacent pathways need to be carefully digested. It was never explicitly mentioned how to consume the uniqueness of an adjacent pathway. Shah-Ur still preferred the most traditional method, consuming it after holding a god ascension ritual. There were too few reference examples. Aemon could be said to have stolen Mr. Door's ritual and accumulation, achieving godhood in one step. Lilith herself had a foundation. The ancient sun god was not worth referencing. Did Mr. Fool and the Evernight goddess hold rituals to accommodate uniqueness? The Evernight goddess might have shown a hint of it, but Mr. Fool's experiences during his slumber were too blank. Perhaps he directly used outer deity-level power to wear down the uniqueness. He wasn't very clear about the Paragon's god ascension ritual. It wasn't that he couldn't get it, but that it wasn't necessary. As a deity of the knowledge domain, should his god ascension ritual still follow the formula of the blasphemy slate? Couldn't he think for himself? The Perfected One pathway, also known as the Craftsman pathway, represents practical knowledge and symbolizes the development of civilization. Its core is to lead civilization to achieve developmental leaps. But since Earth can't escape the barrier, why not just dance with spirits for now? Shah tossed the uniqueness in his hand up and down a couple of times. The Paragon uniqueness turned into 2 walnuts. He leaned back on the throne, playing with the walnuts. Although the uniqueness could be consumed, if such an item couldn't be perfectly digested, one would drop their equipment if beaten to death. There were many examples. Phlegre, the Wolf of Resurrection, with both Evernight and Fool pathways, was dropped. The ancient sun god, though intentional that time, still overplayed his hand and was dropped. In the original timeline, Aemon, with both Error and Door pathways, was also dropped. Although the Hermit had resurrection methods, he couldn't guarantee that if he consumed an extra uniqueness, he wouldn't drop it after death. Then, let's prepare 2 lines. The White Emperor played with the walnuts for a while. He smiled and stood up. The walnuts in his hand changed shape again, like modeling clay. After all, this was the uniqueness of the Craftsman pathway. Shaping was a basic operation. Before long, the uniqueness's appearance transformed into a semi-transparent smart chip, somewhat out of place with this era. At this moment, the door to the bedchamber opened. Ornias, wearing a dark, translucent nightgown, with her hair loose and her face exquisitely beautiful, walked in. A scent like roses emanated from her. After seeing the chip in the White Emperor's hand, she paused, then spread a pair of pitch-black wings, directly enveloping the entire bedchamber. Even knowing that no one dared to spy here, the Sanguine Queen instinctively added a layer of secrecy. Uniqueness of the Paragon pathway. Ornias hurried a few steps to the White Emperor's side, looking at the small chip in his hand. Although the chip was small, the content it carried was immense. The information that this crystallization of technology could hold was far greater than that of books or scrolls. Chapter 308 Kings of Angels. When did you get the uniqueness? Beauty goddess, Ornias was a little surprised. She originally thought her husband had done enough in these 200 years, but she didn't expect him to quietly find the uniqueness of an adjacent pathway. As a high-level being, she could see a large amount of information being uploaded and recorded every second. She glanced and saw that among them was the mystical knowledge related to the moon pathway that she had shared. Recently, I don't have too many things to do. The uniqueness of fate is not just a toy. Shah explained simply. Although the Hermit was very busy, the White Emperor was quite relaxed. Tudor handled administration, and the 7 Lights advanced civilization. The angels he could mobilize were also very numerous. Not to mention the 2 basic foundations of the Elves and the Sanguine, even Antigonus was relatively obedient. Who told this little wolf to possess such a treasure? He had territory and influence, making things easy. During the latter half of the Hermit and the Lord of Storm's battle, when the attention of the gods was drawn, he could easily obtain the uniqueness with a slight arrangement. The uniqueness of fate was quite useful for treasure hunting. The White Emperor had previously gambled with the uniqueness in the River of Fate, also collecting the clues he needed. The good lucky one always had to be used. Ornia stood on her tiptoes and kissed Shah-Ur's cheek. She naturally understood what this meant, that the Hermit no longer had competitors in the 2 pathways of knowledge. After accommodating the Paragon uniqueness, as a dual pathway true god, the Hermit would hardly encounter any threats. Shah smiled and put away the perfected chip in his hand. You've obtained the uniqueness of the Paragon pathway, so the Black Emperor will definitely target the Justiciar pathway as well. Recently, a Sequence 2 angel named Tamara, from the Justiciar pathway, joined us. Ornias spoke of recent events. Although the White Emperor was playing in hosting delegated management mode and governing by inaction, Ornias would not do the same. As the rightful White Empress, she often sought benefits for their faction. Perhaps we can pay a little attention to this tomorrow. Ornius's blood-red eyes flickered. She felt that this angel of the Justiciar pathway, who chose to pledge allegiance to them instead of the Black Emperor, must have some ambition. They didn't need to actively help, but a little attention might cause some trouble for the Black Emperor in the future. Good idea. Sha'ur naturally wouldn't object. And it's funny to say, whenever the Tamara family defected to the Black Emperor, it would mean that the Black Emperor had mastered the Justiciar pathway. Paying a little attention to the movements of the Tamara family might yield some results. Although I don't think this is anything particularly precious, I can indeed mobilize the forces of the Order side belonging to the Solomon Empire. This is what identity brings. Even without Beander characteristics, this order can compel angels to serve me. Solomon probably only thought at the time that this was just a symbol of status for a god, as his own authority was the most applicable. But seeing the battle in the spirit world, he might have other ideas. Sha'ur felt a little innocent as he spoke. Because this honor was given by the Black Emperor himself. When Solomon established this order system, Sha'ur, as the co-emperor, received recognition in terms of order. The crown above his head, formed from a sequence 2 characteristic, symbolized the shared power of the two emperors. The White Emperor shared the power of order, and the Black Emperor influenced the order of the spirit world, but the White Emperor obtained tangible power. And the spirit world is different from reality, with different rules. The hermit's way of influencing the spirit world was not through order, and no specific order was established, so the Black Emperor's gains were limited. This made the relationship between the two sides quite subtle. I inherited the beauty goddess characteristic from the ancestor. Ornias understood. Seeing that Sha'ur didn't expose it, she brought it up proactively. Then it seems we cannot be friends with the Evernight goddess. Sha'ur chuckled, glancing at the king of angels beside him, as if confirming. Now, the number of kings of angels under him was no less than that of the current, true creator. The current balance of power on the North Continent, we also participated in its construction. We don't need to have any special contact with the Evernight goddess. Ornias said this, as if only just remembering that the Sanguine still had a beauty goddess characteristic, and then casually inherited it. However, she truly felt that the current situation on the North Continent was good. Even the warring god of combat church and the night church had to restrain their conflicts. The White Emperor seemed to become a key point. He had a good relationship with the Church of the Earth Mother, which subtly leaned towards the god of combat. The Evernight goddess held the moon uniqueness, and the White Emperor's empress was a king of angels of the moon pathway. If the Evernight goddess were eliminated, who would get the moon uniqueness? So, a stalemate seemed like a good choice. What about the last beauty goddess characteristic? Sha'ur was unsure if the last beauty goddess characteristic was on the Western continent. After all, this was hearsay he saw before transmigrating and never appeared in the main text. I don't know. The ancestor never found it, and the Sanguine have no clues either. Ornias paused as she spoke. From the looks of it, the Earth Mother also seems to have no clues. So, it really might be on the Western continent. It seems only by finding Jitas can the answer be known. Sha'ur felt that this was most likely the truth. If Lilith had also inherited Omi Bella's memories, she would have known that without a sequence 1, the moon pathway could not give birth to a true god. That's why she would allow a friendly king of angels to emerge from this pathway. But was the characteristic left by Lilith clean? Sha'ur reached out to the Sanguine Queen beside him. Ornias naturally leaned into his embrace, about to kiss him, but he pressed her lips. Is the characteristic left by your ancestor clean? He raised his palm and closed his 5 fingers. Ornias understood his meaning. She parted her red lips slightly, and a drop of heart blood appeared. Sha'ur's method for identifying pollution was actually very simple. Just throw it onto Saphira Castle and observe the reaction of the gray fog space. The reaction of the grayish-white mist was not intense, indicating it was relatively safe. Are you all right? It just makes me need you. Ornias was not angry. Instead, she wrapped around him even more passionately. When she absorbed the ancestor's legacy, she naturally considered such problems. The result was, of course, controllable. It was just that before the power of the second beauty goddess characteristic was completely digested, she needed to satisfy herself well. Acting was not necessary. She had been the beauty goddess for too long, digestion was instant. All that was needed was to relieve the inevitable mental pressure. Hey, in a certain fanfiction, eternal blazing sun fell this way. Shah thought of a certain circle of inevitability, and didn't think there was any problem with checking more thoroughly. His advantage was that he could try to check and solve problems through other Saphira. Blushing sounds gradually filled the room. Necessary caution was required, paranoia was not. Meanwhile, in the gray fog space, the drop of divine blood that had been dissolved by the gray fog reappeared and was absorbed by the celestial venerable's curtain. Chapter 309 Cross-shareholding. Over a long period, the White Emperor tried to find the last Beander characteristic of the Worm of Time. Even if its effect was limited, it could be freely distributed, and he genuinely liked the path of error. Unfortunately, he found nothing. Thinking about it, it made sense. Even Aemon, who appeared earlier, couldn't find it, so it was already good that he got one. This also made Shah discover a pattern. No matter how great the first mover advantage, those who failed to gather the Beander characteristics in time ultimately seemed to miss out on godhood. Medici, Aemon, Adam, Ouroboros, and Tolsner all showed this symptom to varying degrees. If one were to calculate carefully, in the star-studded fourth epic, among the beings who surpassed sequence 1, after the final act, the only one who didn't die and retained his position was the god of steam and machinery. And this was only temporary. The knowledge more was locked by the mother nest, and it was still unknown who would ultimately ascend. Adhering to the principle of first step, first in every step, slow in every step. The White Emperor agreed to the Black Emperor's request. Do we really have to agree? The beauty goddess Ornias didn't want to deepen cooperation with the Solomon family. The current situation was most beneficial to them. Deepening cooperation in the spirit world might make the Solomon family a burden. They only needed to maintain the current situation and spend more time to achieve the same results. Of course, cooperation is the cornerstone of success. Instead of internal strife, it's better to look further ahead. The White Emperor said calmly, tapping the armrest of his throne with his finger. The Black Emperor's proposal was simple, to truly establish a set of order applicable to the spirit world. Only by establishing order in the spirit world could more power of order be absorbed, rather than watching the White Emperor enjoy both domestic and foreign benefits. This was a further binding. But the hermit didn't care, exchanging space for time. What the hermit wanted was knowledge and understanding. These other minor benefits were fleeting. The hermit's way of influencing the spirit world leaned towards exerting influence through cultural soft power. This required sufficient time to truly achieve the effect the hermit desired, which was to influence the spirit world without relying on the authority of the three families of the sequence of the error, but through Shah himself, without relying on Beander characteristics. The Black Emperor wanted to establish order in the spirit world, similar to King of the Five Seas, Nast, who wanted to establish a set of pirate order that everyone would obey in the Five Seas. This order leaned more towards law and violence, directly exerting influence in the spirit world. For the former, the hermit slowly invested in the spirit world fund, holding it long-term and continuously receiving returns. The Black Emperor could only get a small dividend. For the latter, the Black Emperor joined as a partner, and might even gain some initiative later. Ornias's reluctance was due to not wanting Solomon to participate in their family project. The moon pathway could also influence the spirit world, and this king of angels clearly had her own ideas. Solomon is different from us. Solomon has a family, we only have a race. An emperor is never truly free. Although strong order can feed back to the Black Emperor, it is also a burden. Shah gently shook his head. Anchors could help maintain the balance between humanity and divinity, which had been proven. But divinity itself was complex. The stronger the order, the stronger the Black Emperor, and wouldn't his divinity also become stronger? No matter in what world, power, wealth, and strength, these extraordinary, special, or privileged things would inherently affect humanity. It was acceptable for the Black Emperor to want more because he couldn't hold it all alone and would eventually have to actively share it with the hermit. If the influence in this regard wasn't terrifying, with the pride of the sun pathway, why wouldn't Osekis call himself the sun god, but rather change to eternal blazing sun, making a certain distinction from the sun? You mean, this will further affect the Black Emperor's state? Ornia suddenly understood. She hadn't thought about it from this perspective before. After all, she came from the second epoch, and the ancient gods and subordinate gods didn't consider this kind of influence much. Sharing benefits, sharing risks, that's what cooperation is. Sha'ur didn't care much. If Solomon didn't seek the spirit world, the hermit could do it himself with a bit more time. If Solomon wanted a share, then he should take a big bowl. The hermit really wanted to make a big cake, carefully controlling the sugar content to avoid exceeding the limit. The spirit world within the North Continent, the Mist Sea, the spirit world within the North Sea, and also the Sunia Sea. Is this another divine war? The beauty goddess Ornias didn't think that other deities would sit idly by while the two emperors worked together wholeheartedly on a venture. That depends on the Black Emperor's ability. Didn't he obtain some Beander characteristics of the Justiciar pathway? If he can properly distribute the benefits of the spirit world and publicize them in the form of fundamental order, appeasing the various churches within the empire, then even a divine war won't be lost. Sha'ur closed his eyes. He didn't fear divine war, whether it was a team battle or a one-on-one. He wouldn't lose a one-on-one. If they lost a team battle, it wouldn't be him who was disgraced, he was just a subordinate. The leader of the Solomon Empire was Solomon. On the other side, the Black Emperor was also preparing for the mysterious ritual to accommodate the Justiciar uniqueness. His staunchest ally was the true creator, so he naturally knew the Justiciar's ascension ritual very well. Deities of the order pathway still had a strong desire for control. He couldn't stand by and watch the hermit prosper by eating from both ends, experiencing both domestic deflation and foreign inflation, without doing anything. Otherwise, if it continued, the White Emperor's collapse could drag the Black Emperor down, but if the Black Emperor collapsed, the hermit would only feel a slight dizziness. Who could tolerate that? It was better if the hermit didn't eat from both ends. Everything should be unified into the Solomon Empire's pot. What do you think? The Black Emperor looked at the dense curtain of shadows before him. Even looking back through history, only the Phoenix progenitor had carefully managed the spirit world. But the Phoenix progenitor's core was still the underworld. He was digging from the spirit world to supplement the underworld. Subsequent gods, including the ancient sun god, didn't have a deep affection for the spirit world. Previously, the upper limit that spirit world creatures could reach was not an angel, but a king of angels. The eyes behind the curtain of shadows revealed a message. At this time, although the true creator was also mad, he was, after all, the orthodox faith of the North Continent, with a sufficient base of anchors. Moreover, the Black Emperor's authority was very interesting. The crazier the true creator became, the more the Black Emperor could twist it into a rational madness. The seven lights cannot reach the level of a king of angels. Solomon didn't doubt the credibility of the true creator's words. After all, he was the former creator. However, the seven lights truly couldn't reach the level of a king of angels. The hermit wants to cultivate one himself. Solomon frowned. Chapter 310, Worm of Time. The hermit possesses the authority to create life. The Paragon Pathways Sequence 4 Alchemist and Sequence 3 Occultist can both achieve related feats, making them relatively high-level craftsmen. The white light that the hermit constantly maintains in the spirit world is not hidden. He openly utilizes the vast information database of the spirit world to nurture this AI program, which resembles a bean bun. It has not been given life, but it can essentially be considered a part of the hermit. After being reminded by the true creator, the Black Emperor also guessed the hermit's intentions. The hermit wants to be a king of angels level spirit world creature, in addition to being a god. This doesn't seem contradictory. As long as the hermit doesn't separate them, the two will be considered one. The upper limit for spirit world creatures is the king of angels, so perhaps they rely on the power of the spirit world and don't require additional Beander characteristics. If so, with two sides of the same coin, mutually combined, the hermit would be equivalent to a god-level spirit world creature. This would indirectly break the upper limit that spirit world creatures can only reach the king of angels level. The hermit and the demoness should be cooperating. This method seems to have originated from the sorcerer pathway. The voice from behind the curtain of shadows provided more mystical knowledge. As the sorcerer pathway advances in sequence, the imprint left in the mirror becomes stronger. These mirror people are special, not temporary projections. At the God stage, due to the uniqueness of the true God, the imprint returns to the main body, and the mirror person merges with the main body, existing as both a real entity and a mirror object, encompassing both states. This is also why the sequence Zero Demoness possesses the authority over the mirror world, is the master of the mirror world, and can control everything related to mirrors and their extended branch abilities. The Hermit is clearly following this path as well. He also wants to encompass both a real existence and a spirit world creature, and is steadily progressing on this path. He might really want to become the Lord of the spirit world. The true creator recalled the Hermit's battle with the Lord of Storms, and couldn't help but fall silent. The key is not that the Hermit dares to think, but that the Hermit's method is feasible. In the fourth epic, when the three families of the sequence of the error had no true gods, wouldn't a god-level spirit world creature be the Lord of the spirit world? The Hermit did not hide this matter too much. The true creator could understand it, and the god of knowledge and wisdom could as well. The three gods of wind, wisdom, and white taking turns to fight the Hermit was not for nothing. However, the Hermit's displayed ferocity temporarily suppressed some gods, and these gods also felt that the vortex within the Solomon Empire would tacitly slow down the Hermit's progress. They would wait until the Hermit's emotions stabilized before increasing the intensity. This is an open conspiracy. The Black Emperor knew that his choices were limited. The White Emperor had not rejected his proposal. If the control over the spirit world were deepened through the power of order, the Hermit would later be even more deserving of the title of Lord of the Spirit World. If the Black Emperor did not intervene, then with the political alliance of the Solomon Empire, the Hermit could slowly wear them down, gradually cultivating the white light into a king of angels, and iterating and updating his own form of existence. This is very difficult to prevent, unless the Hermit is distracted or cannot access the spirit world. The worst option would be for the Black Emperor and White Emperor to compete internally, but with no intense conflict, it would be ineffective. To contain the Hermit, Solomon would face either the division of the North Continent, losing half of its territory, or the empire nominally remaining, but half of its power being locked up. In the Solomon Majestic Hall, the shadow curtain that obscured one side disappeared. The Black Emperor on the throne showed no emotion on his face. He is the Black Emperor, the first god born in the fourth epic. Even in the face of the current complex situation, he still chose an aggressive approach. It wasn't only the Hermit who planned for the future. The two emperors of the Solomon Empire once again reached a unified agreement. The Black Emperor negotiated the distribution of benefits with the internal Church of the Earth Mother, God of War Church, and Night Church, and publicized it using the authority of the Order side. Although the lawyer pathway is best at exploiting loopholes, the Black Emperor would not easily overdraw his political credit. Such a reasonable distribution of benefits is completely trustworthy. Only by solving internal issues can one deal with external ones. The Hermit's several battles have always been fought beautifully. The Black Emperor, who had not personally played ranked matches for a long time, did not want internal problems to lead to an ugly record, which would also make the Black Emperor seem inferior to the White Emperor. In the spirit world, a part of the Hermit, the part that transformed into a spirit world creature, began to establish some basic orders and laws suitable for the spirit world. The former has value anywhere, order is important, while the latter targets the common parts of the spirit world and reality. When reality and the spirit world dance together, naturally, some laws are needed to restrict powerful spirit world creatures. This is also part of the cooperation. The new order of the spirit world can only be announced by the Hermit. In the stages of other formulations, promotions, and profit sharing, the Black Emperor can appropriately participate. This is almost an open secret. The Hermit is going to become the Lord of the spirit world, the first god-level spirit world creature in history. The Black Emperor actually chose to cooperate with the Hermit. If they truly continue this cooperation, then one will be the Lord of Reality, one the Lord of the spirit world, one a fallen god, and then they will try to win over the three Orthodox churches of the North Continent. What would the other gods, not in the North Continent faction, play? Although this alliance also has many internal contradictions, the God of Knowledge and Wisdom, who has already had conflicts with the Hermit, cannot tolerate watching the Hermit control the spirit world, even if the Black Emperor can. Although the omniscience of the White Tower is not affected by the spirit world, if the spirit world really gains an administrator, omniscience will no longer be accurate. Omniscience is just omniscience, true knowledge, false knowledge, all omniscience. If the hermit insists on injecting ambiguous things through the spirit world, that would also be quite disgusting. Reborn, the god of knowledge and wisdom, was the first to act. This god, who symbolizes omniscience, is blessed with wisdom and also possesses various methods of sabotage. The hermit wants to follow the demoness's path, so they will target the hermit's spirit realm person, dissolving this part of the mental imprint and destroying the white light. The hermit stood in the spirit world, extended his hand, and grasped. Two long spears, one red and one purple, formed from pure light, pointed at the dragon of wisdom charging towards him. At this moment, he turned his head to glance in the direction of the underworld. Death, Salinger was once again attempting to merge with the underworld. Nonsense. The hermit stood still. A new figure walked out from within him. This was a manifestation of a part of the hermit's information, wrapped around a sequence 1 worm of time characteristic. This worm of time grabbed at the hermit, stealing some of his power and Beander abilities, then transformed into flowing light and shadow, appearing in the city of the dead deep within the underworld. A giant phantom of a clock emerged, and time began to flow backward. Chapter 311, The New and Old Death. The massive illusory clock seemed to carry a certain magic. As the hands ticked and the bell chimed, the torrent of time flowed backward, and time began to reverse. The progress bar showing the integration of the underworld by death, Salinger retreated back to the starting point. The worm of time leisurely appeared, looking at Salinger with amusement. A delaying tactic is not bad. But can it truly be effective? It smiled, transforming into a shimmering ripple of light and disappearing. All over the city of the dead, worms of time in various forms appeared. These pests of fate gnawed at Salinger's imprint in the city of the dead, making him feel uncomfortable for a moment before he reverted back to Salinger. Once the error pathway reaches sequence 1, there is basically nothing that cannot be stolen. Even death's control over the underworld can be stolen. Isn't it just authority? Steal it. Death. Salinger was not anxious. Pale flames burned in his eyes. Wherever his gaze fell, dead worms of time emerged in the void, but more worms of time had already relocated. Even a 2+1 king of angels would find it difficult to kill an archangel who can run. Salinger originally thought that as the divine war escalated, it might be his chance, but he still underestimated the hermit. As long as this worm of time, the hermit's avatar, existed, he would have no opportunity. If such a marauder stole part of his anchor or authority during his advancement, combined with the residual influence of the phoenix, the probability of him losing control was extremely high. Even if he succeeded by chance, it was uncertain who the resulting death would be. The hermit seemed not to need to expend much effort to suppress his deification. Splitting off a sequence 1 avatar barely affected the hermit's combat power. Since that was the case, he decided to force the hermit to invest more power in this subsidiary battlefield. Salinger made up his mind and began to chase the worm of time with all his might. Shah was slightly surprised. Is this a king of angels close to godhood? He really has guts. As death rampaged, worms of time hidden in the void died one by one. The remaining worms of time converged. Salinger lowered his eyes, and his huge serpent tail, like a scythe, swept down. Light and shadow flickered, and the crimson moonlight shone forth. The worm of time disappeared, and in its place appeared a woman of unbelievable beauty. Her appearance was the sharpest blade. Even the ruthless death was stunned by the ultimate beauty, and the force of his attack weakened. Dark shackles turned into chains, locking the feathered serpent's tail. Behind Salinger, the worm of time, which had swapped back by stealing the avatar's position, lightly clapped its hands. The authority of the underworld, taken from the hermit, transformed into a phoenix scepter covered in pale feathers. By stealing the secrets of heaven, it disguised itself as a favored one of the phoenix progenitor. The light in its eyes shifted. It waved forward, and an illusory phoenix flapped its wings and flew high, its sharp beak pecking at death in the air. Those eyes, burning with pale flames and seeming to hold layers of stargates, looked back and glanced at Shah while bombarding Salinger. Bang! Salinger staggered 2 steps. As a king of angels of the death pathway, his resistance to death was decent, and he was not seriously injured. But at that moment, the crimson moonlight shone upon him. His body, like that of an undead, began to regenerate, and the power of death started to wane. Salinger's hands turned pale. After forcibly driving out the influence, the beauty goddess Ornias and the worm of time Sha'ur charged forward again in a combined attack. The two showed absolutely no respect to the death before them, showing no fear of this 2+1 king of angels. Death's idea of chasing and killing the worm of time became an empty talk. Salinger suppressed the rage in his heart but was helpless against the combination before him. Without achieving godhood, he was ultimately still a king of angels, unable to create too large a gap between himself and other kings of angels. He thought of the golden phoenix ornament that could move the tributaries of the Evernight. If he used it, he would be able to reach the level of a king of kings among angels. At that point, even the hermit would have to take him seriously, instead of just sending an avatar to deal with him. The worm of time Sha'ur remained silent, a slight smile still on his face. He swung the phoenix scepter in his hand, gripping towards death, and then violently pulled. It was actually forcibly attempting to enslave Salinger, the peak of the contemporary death pathway. Ornias naturally cooperated, crimson light enveloping him, also carrying the power of enslavement. How dare you? Salinger felt the pulling and shackling of his spiritual body. This time, he was truly enraged. Relying on his ability to control souls, he forcefully stabilized his spiritual body. The blazing pale flames even burned away the crimson moonlight, but soon he felt an emptiness in his heart. Conversely, on the worm of time's side, the phoenix scepter in Sha'ur's hand became increasingly vibrant. In the eye sockets that seemed cast from bronze, illusory doors layered upon one another, flashing with a hint of human-like desire and greed. Without Sha'ur needing to urge it, the cry already resounded. Sequence 0 inches death has many authorities, but the power a king of angels can exert is limited. And now, although the authorities of death, paleness, enslavement, and undead still belonged to Salinger, the authority of endpoint had just been stolen. The authority of endpoint symbolizes the final destination of everything, the common endpoint of all life. The ancient death relied on the authority of open black lens bracket endpoint close black lens bracket and the abilities of the door pathway to derive the underworld. Without compensating for this missing piece, and unable to symbolize the final destination of death, Salinger could never become the true, complete, death. When a marauder steals a high-level characteristic like authority, they face many difficulties. The success rate is not only very low, but there are also restrictions. However, that is the case when stealing. What is happening now is not stealing, it is returning the item to its rightful owner. With the phoenix scepter as the reliance, the authority of endpoint does not need to be returned. In this world, is there anyone who can better symbolize the final destination of all things and the endpoint of life than the phoenix progenitor, who created the underworld while alive, and whose death imprint floats on the tributaries of the Evernight after its fall? Now I am the final destination of all living beings. And you are merely the essence of death, the sovereign of the dead. The smile on the worm of time's face grew deeper. It had stolen one segment of death's three-part honorific name, and a very crucial segment at that. This involved the identity of the Lord of the Underworld and the authority of the Underworld. Even the beauty goddess Ornias looked at her companion with some shock, as well as the scepter surrounded by the phoenix, emitting a familiar aura. Sha'ur had not briefed her on this plan beforehand. Ornias recovered, and her beautiful eyes looked at Salinger with a hint of sympathy. Are you really here to cause trouble for the hermit? Chapter 312, Light of the Spirit World. PFF'd. Salinger coughed up a mouthful of blood, infuriated. The sympathetic gaze of the beauty goddess was too lethal. It wasn't just a manifestation of her authority over ultimate beauty, Ornias and Salinger were both demigods from the second epoch. To be tricked like this in front of an old acquaintance brought such a sense of humiliation that even the naturally cold-blooded feathered serpent found it hard to bear. This didn't mean Salinger was foolish, he was just unlucky. Annoying the hermit, his enemy, was perfectly reasonable. A king of angels with 2+1 Beander characteristics wouldn't be so cowardly as to not show his face. This fellow also had a host of backup plans, but he never expected things to turn out this way. This was also normal. Sha'ur himself hadn't thought of such a play beforehand. Salinger wasn't a king of angels with his hands and feet bound, waiting to be served, he was a king of angels in good condition. The success rate of stealing would be very low, and its significance to the battle wouldn't be great, as what was stolen would eventually have to be returned. He just had the foresight to instantly understand the help that the Phoenix's undestroyed backup plan could offer him. May I ask, who rules the underworld? Shah once again waved the Phoenix scepter. Under the effect of stealing heavenly secrets, he seemed like the Phoenix's avatar in the underworld. The endpoint authority of the death pathway manifested, and the power of the entire city of the dead was imbued into the scepter. The gloomy river of eternal darkness swept towards Salinger, pulling him towards Shah, towards the endpoint of life. Even as a half-death, Salinger could float on the river of eternal darkness without sinking. However, as the river of eternal darkness surged, approaching the endpoint, even a half-death would feel life draining away. And now, Salinger was genuinely a bit intimidated. The thought of pulling out the golden phoenix accessory at a critical moment, which had risen earlier, vanished completely. Salinger fled, like a gust of wind. The demigods of the second epic were all very accustomed to fleeing. After all, his opponent was the hermit. Running away was not shameful. Gazing at the fleeing Salinger, Shah could feel the scepter in his hand stirring. It seemed to be urging Shah to rush forward, to skin and dismember the feathered serpent, to devour him completely. But Shah remained unmoved. He tapped the scepter, and the bronze door of the illusory phoenix's eyes closed. It seemed a small error had occurred. The underworld, is it ours? The beauty goddess Ornius's tone was somewhat uncertain. She had actually felt the power of the underworld repelling Salinger just now. This was simply incredible, the death's dominion repelling a half-death. Yes, thank you for your hard work. Shah let out a soft breath. He had stolen the endpoint authority, adding it to the hermit's previous accumulations. Thus, the underworld, created based on the endpoint authority, became a plaything in his hand. Salinger, the only one qualified to challenge him, would also find it very difficult. He had become the lord of the underworld before becoming the lord of the spirit world. The underworld was attached to the spirit world, but it was in a semi-autonomous state. Was this, the yet-to-be-born lord of the spirit world, eliminating a vassal king within his domain? What about over there? Ornius's lips curved upwards. He looked towards the spirit world, where the divine battle was still ongoing. I am merely a weak sequence 1 now. You're not much better, just 2 sequence 1s. Shah didn't pay attention to the divine battle, nor did he intend to return to the hermit. He was currently pondering the characteristics of a sequence 0 death sleeper, the unique death mark. What was its purpose or benefit? All things are equal, yet unequal. All things originate from the beginning, but their proportions differ. In the second epic, even without the underworld, the souls of the dead could still wander in reality, in the spirit world, and in various other places. Before the birth of the Phoenix progenitor, would the deceased leave a death mark in the river of eternal darkness on the western continent? At that time, the seal left by the celestial worthy was at its strongest. If the Phoenix progenitor hadn't drawn in a branch of the river of eternal darkness, then after his demise, where would the unique death mark float if not on the branch of the river of eternal darkness? Or, without a tomb to bury death, would death not die? Instead, would he infinitely revive at the endpoint of death, in the underworld? Is the branch of the river of eternal darkness a limiter? Though death is immortal, does he instinctively seek death? Seeing that Shah was ignoring her, Ornius didn't get angry. She chose to inspect the city of the dead, the ancient death's divine kingdom. As a king of angels of the moon pathway, Shah acquiring the city of the dead meant that Ornius could summon undead calamities from the underworld at any time, indirectly sharing a portion of death's authority. Even if it might not be needed, this didn't dampen Ornius's good mood at the moment. Spirit world. The hermit steadily suppressed the god of knowledge and wisdom. Elsewhere, the Black Emperor and the eternal blazing sun, and the fallen god and the lord of storms, were also in confrontation. The storm, wisdom, and white factions, which should have been at odds, had a tolerable internal atmosphere after being schemed against by the hermit and kicked out of the North Continent. After the matter of the underworld was settled, the hermit's aura actually increased somewhat. Bringing the troublesome underworld back under the spirit world's jurisdiction allowed the white light, nurtured by the hermit himself, to grow further. The mystical influence generated by this event in the spirit world served as nourishment. He raised his arm, and the aura of death swirled around his palm. This was power contributed by the underworld, as if he had remotely grasped the god of knowledge and wisdom's lifeline. Herobergen's face instantly turned ashen, and faint corpse spots and pustules appeared. Although the hermit only obtained a portion of death's authority, by revolving around the endpoint authority and supplementing it with the power of the underworld, the hermit himself could construct a system of death. Through the endpoint authority, he could establish a pathway with knowledge, extending to the concept of death and the lethality of death. Light. Herobergen shouted a dragon language word, and the holy light simulated by the white tauren purified the power of the deceased. However, the spots on his face only faded, not disappearing, and he looked even more aged. Although it was also a form of simulation, the hermit's simulation had the endpoint authority as its core, the power of the underworld as its filler, and finally the power of knowledge. The white tauren was somewhat lacking in this aspect, specifically in its utilization of external forces. The hermit clapped his hands. The 7 lights above the spirit world transformed into a multicolored torrent, surging forth and being held in his hand. Through the endpoint authority, with knowledge paving the way and the underworld providing energy, another branch authority of the death pathway, enslavement, was constructed. The lower level of the enslavement authority is the characteristic possessed by the death pathway sequence 1 Pale Emperor, Lord of Spirits. The Pale Emperor can suppress and even enslave any creature with a spirit, not limited to undead beings and beyonders of the same pathway, but all spirits. At this moment, the hermit no longer saw the god of knowledge and wisdom in his eyes. He extracted the power of the 7 lights and began to nourish the white light he had nurtured. Even if the cost was for the 7 lights to fall from sequence 1 to sequence 2, this cost was acceptable. The accumulation of the 7 lights over several epochs could save the hermit an epoch of arduous work. Using the primordial power of the 7 lights, he nurtured a light of the spirit world at the level of a king of angels. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.